This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate first part of what if Naruto and Harry were cousins. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And for more exclusive and spicy content, follow me on Patreon. Link is in the description below. And now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Minato Namikaze gazed at the enormous creature in front of him while perched atop a giant toad and holding a small bundle of blankets. As he put the bundle down and started to make a long chain of seals to block out the sounds of the fighting around him, he thought, it's now or never. He felt something activate as he completed the final seal, and the world disappeared before his eyes with a strange tugging sensation. Jiraiya of the Sannin witnessed his favorite pupil give his life in defense of the village they had vowed to defend. Every surface was covered in bodies, creating a scene straight out of a horror book. He had witnessed, and participated in, a fight that would shatter many hardened shinobi, but the consequences for his village were even more catastrophic. Before Minato drove the enormous beast out of the village, hundreds had perished at its hands. He had been occupied with battling a man wearing an orange mask who claimed to be the greatest shinobi in history. The knowledge that he had lost despite his best efforts had frightened Jiraiya. The man had survived entirely unharmed. As his prodigy created seals for the final time and summoned the Shinigami, Jiraiya trembled with exhaustion from his struggle. In front of the Kyuubi, a bright light flashed and burst. Consumed by the jutsu he had employed, Minato had disappeared. No. He moved as quickly as he could across to where his nearly son had been, but his cry was muffled by the many cries of the injured and dying. Right now, Naruto was the top priority. Naruto couldn't wait that long to mourn Minato. He could do that later. Naruto would not survive if the ninja and villagers got to him first. When Jiraiya arrived, the child was in tears. With the evil chakra still emanating from the black ink on his stomach, Naruto quickly became quiet as Jiraiya rocked him into a state of tranquil bliss. Just before he shrugged off, Jiraiya thought, I hope. Shish, sleep peacefully Naru-kun. Raya is here, it's okay. Compared to many in his field, Hiruzen Sarutobi had lived a long life. Although his life had not been peaceful, he was thankful for what he had. He had long pondered whether each mission would be his final one, as many skilled shinobi had perished before him. He was weaker than he had believed because he had been buried in paperwork for far too long. Sarutobi became aware that he was genuinely afraid as he observed the demon get closer. He had never seen a full Biju before. Even though he wasn't close to the beast, the chakra levels alone were crippling. Sage chakra spiked, and a big toad with a figure on his back materialized. Minato. With a tear streaming down his wrinkled, aging face, he thought, this is it then. Goodbye, Minato. I wish you luck. As a shockwave swept through the village, blowing out windows and shaking buildings, he touched the glass and said, I'll look after him. Sirius paced the waiting room in front of Lily and James Potter, who held each other's hands tightly. It had only been 2 hours since James had jumped out of bed, shocking Lily badly. It'll be okay, James. We know Minato is strong. He can get through this. He had hardly finished explaining that he had sensed the activation of his cousin's emergency portkey. They had called Sirius and Remus after Lily had calmed him down a bit and talked him out of going to St. Mungo's in just his pajamas. They flowed to the hospital after Sirius agreed to meet them there and Remus arrived to look after 2-month-old Harry. James had left his Auror's badge at home, so Sirius had to flash it to get the welcome witch to tell him if she had seen a tall, blonde man enter and what had happened to him. They were now waiting and wondering if Minato would survive at all as a result of that. According to the witch, he had been in poor health and was being treated by the head healer. 1 hour. The head healer finally made his appearance in the waiting room after an hour of waiting. You his family? Lily sat up more erect, Sirius stopped pacing, and James jumped to his feet. The healer nodded gravely, yes. We are. James exhaled sharply, and Lily grinned. Right then. He was in a bad shape, but he's gone alive. Sirius had taken over and was questioning the healer, asking, how badly was he hurt? Sirius nodded and shook hands with the healer, saying, pretty bad, lot of internal damage. I have no idea who he got into a fight with, but it looks like he lost. If he won, I would hate to see the condition of the other guy. The healer nodded and walked away, saying, thank you. Sirius extended a hand to Lily, and the two of them led James to the fireplace. After observing James's expression, Lily trailed off, come on James, we can visit Min in the morning. Now that you know he's going to be okay. She turned to face Sirius, who shrugged. James entered the fireplace and disappeared before they could speak. Lily started to follow him, but Sirius caught her arm and pulled her back. She gave Sirius a worried look and said, keep an eye on him tonight, Lils. You don't think Sirius shook his head. She nodded, and Sirius let her go to follow James, saying, "Just keep an eye on him." Remus welcomed her as she emerged from the fire. The werewolf smiled and adjusted his cloak, saying, "Thank you for coming out at such a short notice, Remus." As he entered the fireplace, she nodded and said, "I was happy to. See you around, Lily." He vanished in a flash of green. "James?" she yelled as she walked into the living room. She put an arm around his shoulder and he did not respond. He didn't respond when I asked, "James, are you okay?" Rather, he touched the picture frame in his hand with his thumb. Oh. The photo showed James and his cousin Kashina 6 months ago, during Kashina's pregnancy. James abruptly turned to embrace Lily, taking her by surprise. Lily scowled and said, "She's dead." James shook his head and withdrew, saying, "James, you can't possibly know that." Lily sighed and massaged James's back in circles, saying, "Yes, I can. I just know it, Lils. If that were the case, their only option would be to mourn." "It'll be okay, it'll be okay." The young couple was awakened early in the morning. It was nearly 11, by Harry's sobbing. Lily was suspicious right away because she woke up earlier than James. It was not from his bedroom down the hall that Harry had cried. As soon as she sensed that Harry was not in his room, her mother got up and started to move. Sirius's voice echoed up the stairs, calming her fears before she could panic. "That's it, Harry. Yummy, yummy," Sirius exclaimed as he fed Harry, who was enjoying the amusing sounds his Unca pad was producing. Lily started laughing as Sirius turned around, startled. Well, well, well. Sirius had just as much baby mush on him as Harry did. He picked up his wand from the nearby table and easily cleaned himself and Harry of the goop, saying, yeah, laugh at the guy who let you sleep in." He nodded as the two of them heard a yawn coming from the stairway. "Thank you for that, by the way." Lily went to the refrigerator, poured herself a glass of orange juice, and helped herself to the mini buffet that the elves always made. "Good morning, James." He poured himself a cup of coffee and looked twice before saying, "Good morning, Lily, Sirius." From beside Harry, Sirius waved and said, "Wait, Sirius?" With a bewildered blink, James said, "Morning, mate." Harry was hefted out of his high chair by Sirius, who smiled and asked, "What are you doing here, Siri?" James nodded, but it was clear that he was too exhausted to pay attention to the conversation. "Well, I thought that I would come and see how you two were doing after last night, but when I got here, poor Harry was crying and you were both dead to the world, so I let you guys sleep while I took care of little Butt here." Harry yawned broadly and curled up in Sirius' arms as if he could sense the atmosphere in the room. James took a seat at the table and filled a plate with food. While reminding James not to eat with his mouth full, Lily gave him a back of the head smack and said, "Thank you, Sirius." "Arg." James dropped his fork and held up his hands to block the attack. James gave a quick nod and picked up his fork once more. "Stop talking with your mouth full and I'll stop hitting you," he said. The couple stopped arguing to observe Harry as he yawned once more. After giving her cute baby boy a smile, Lily decided that James was no longer worth hitting, so she stopped. Lily became totally preoccupied with the baby, and James and Sirius sighed with relief. James stopped eating and turned to face Lily. "Do you two plan to visit Minato today?" he asked. She gave a nod. "Yes." After removing Harry from Sirius, she sat down at the table. "We will. We also want to know if you will watch Harry today." Sirius gave a nod. James sighed and pushed his plate aside, saying, "I can do that." Lily stood up and glanced at his partially consumed plate of food before returning Harry to Sirius, saying, "Lily, let's go get ready." She kissed Harry and went upstairs to change, saying, "Thank you, Sirius." She and James rode the flow to St. Mungo's 10 minutes later. As they walked to Minato's room on the second floor, Lily was whispering to James on his arm. "James, you realize that Min may not even be awake?" James didn't look at Lily as he nodded. They pushed open the ward door after she let out a sigh. To Lily's astonishment, Minato was sitting up at a bed at the rear of the room. "Minato!" exclaimed James as they approached Minato's bed. Minato gave them a startled look. "Lily." "James." James tried to give Minato a hug, but Lily stopped him. She pulled up one of their chairs and pushed James into one. "How are you already awake, Min?" Lily asked, trying to understand this specific question despite her confusion. Minato simply gave her a bewildered blink. She asked, "What do you mean, Lily?" and James responded, "I felt it activate last night and when we came to see you, the healer said you barely survived." Minato took a step back. Lily took his hand and said, "Wow, I didn't realize it was that bad." Minato turned her head away, but James nodded and said, We're just happy you are okay, Min. He didn't sound sincere when he said, thanks. With a nod, Lily dragged James from his seat. After Lily pulled him from the ward, James objected, saying, sorry, Min, but we have to go. We'll come back tomorrow. Minato hardly paid attention. James was enraged when he and Lily emerged from the fireplace at home. What was that about, Lily? He exclaimed. Turning on her heel, Lily charged into the kitchen. James, couldn't you see that Minato didn't want to talk right now? As soon as you mentioned being hurt, he closed up and stopped talking. On top of that, don't you think it is a little strange that he is already up and moving after almost dying yesterday? James gave her a defiant look. James heard her storm out of the kitchen and up the stairs, saying, fine. You want to throw a fit? Go ahead. Then he collapsed into a chair and buried his face in his arms. When Sirius looked into the kitchen and noticed James at the table, he asked, what was that all about? James waved a hand at Sirius and said, James? Sirius sighed and said, go away, I don't want to talk about it. James moaned as he heard Sirius' footsteps fade away. Fine. Don't. I wanted to tell you that I was leaving anyway. Why did a single, basic issue lead to so many issues? He got up and went to look for Lily. She and Harry were in the nursery. James sighed as he stopped in the doorway and asked, finally done sulking, are you? He moved farther into the room and she turned to face him. I'm so sorry, Lils. I was such a jerk and you were right. Minato didn't want to talk. I was just being so obnoxious in trying to force the issue. She took one of his hands in hers and dragged him down onto the floor beside her, saying, thank you, James. I accept your sincere apology. While Harry gurgled, James nodded and said, perhaps we can try again tomorrow. Lily grinned as he pulled her into a one-arm embrace, saying, I would like that. I love you, Lily. Yes, you do. Hey, James, Sirius, and Lily paid Minato a visit at St. Mungo's over the course of the following few days. They occasionally brought Harry, but Minato always had a dejected expression on her face. A trainee healer with a ton of paperwork stopped the three of them from leaving on the 10th day that Minato was at St. Mungo's. James looked at the trainee as though he had grown two heads. I need you to sign these forms so we can discharge Namikaze from here. With a sigh, the trainee gave an explanation. Lily nodded and picked up the documents in a nearby quill, saying, he's driving everyone nuts. We believe he would do better in a closed setting, namely, anywhere but here. Pretending not to notice Minato's shiver and muttering, paperwork demons, she pulled the table beside Minato's bed over and started carefully filling out the paperwork. Minato questioned, do I get my clothes back? The trainee rolled his eyes and clicked his fingers, asking, or do you expect me to leave in pajamas? Minato stared at the small elf in disbelief as it bowed and said, Twilly. Get Mr. Namikaze's clothes for me. Minato's clothing materialized at the foot of the bed with a snap of the elf's fingers. In order to change, Minato hastily got up and pulled the curtains over his bed. The three had completed the large pile of paperwork and were prepared for him when he pulled back the curtains. Sirius smiled and asked, what happened to my coat? With the heavy pile of papers, Lily slapped Sirius across the head and said, unfortunately, gone. But apparently, the ladies around here love a guy with abs. Minato perspired. Maybe we should go before Lily gives Sirius a concussion? As Sirius sidestepped another blow from Lily, James nodded. Sirius sighed when Minato shook his head. We're taking flow travel. You know how to use it? I asked. They hurried out of the ward and down to the reception, saying, well, Lily can help you. I don't really know how to explain it. I learned when I was really little. Lily pulled him aside to explain what Minato needed to do while James and Sirius were setting up the flow. Minato nodded and asked, got the idea? Good. Even though Minato understood the theory completely, he was still able to fly out of the fireplace when he arrived. He got up and brushed himself off, glaring at a laughing Sirius. He had just gotten the last of the soot when a man walked in. The yin chakra he had sealed inside of him started to react instantly. Minato heard Sirius calling to someone in the distance, Remy, are you okay? Remy, before he fainted once more. As memories returned in a faint jolt, Minato realized, I just don't understand what caused the two of them to react like that towards each other. With a groan, Minato turned over on his side. Damn Kyuubi. This is worse than when Sensei made me run up and down the monument for disparaging his awful books. The moment James and Lily heard Minato moan, they ceased their conversation. Min, you all right? James received another moan. Lily asked, how are you feeling, Minato? In an attempt to gauge her patient's state. Hurts, all over. Worse than time I had to run up and down the monument for insulting my sensei's books, James laughed. Lily gave James a disbelieving look and said, "He's all right, Lils." Minato glared at James as she slowly sat up. From upstairs came a sudden cry. Lily said, "Damn, I'll be right back." She went to check on Harry. After observing her depart, James turned to face Minato. Minato looked at Remus in confusion and asked, "So, why did you collapse when Remus came in?" "Who's Remus?" James asked, blinking. "You mean, I haven't introduced you to yet?" Minato asked, shaking his head as the pain subsided. "Bloody hell, knew I forgot something." James, language. Lily had just come back into the room holding Harry. Harry extended his hand to Minato, who had come to adore the nearly 3-month-old. Harry smiled, unleashed a flash of magic, and turned his own hair yellow. Minato took the wriggling child despite raising his eyebrows. Harry sighed as he was in Minato's arms and began to play with her hair. Lily chuckled at the cute scene. Minato gave the young child a pitiful smile. James smiled as he observed Harry attempting to eat a small portion of Minato's hair, saying, "You're very good with children, minimum." "No, Harry. I should be, James. I have a little one of my own." Minato's eyes began to well up with tears. "He is 11 days old now. I wish I could see him again." Lily's eyes were filled with tears. Minato grinned and asked, "What's his name, Minato?" "We named him Naruto. His name could mean either maelstrom or fishcake." Kush.ne. Chan wanted it to mean maelstrom. "He has the same hair as me." Lily saw Minato's eyes darken when her husband's cousin Kushina was brought up. "It's okay, minimum, we'll find a way for you to see him." Minato was not paying attention. Instead, he was thinking about another child who was far away and would be missing his parents, all while concentrating on the small child who was now sleeping on his lap. In Konoha, things were far less tranquil. Since returning to power a few days earlier, the Sandaime Hokage had spent several hours each day participating in council meetings. Regretfully, the council sessions were ineffective. The majority of them were occupied by irate council members demanding that one Uzumaki Naruto be put to death. The Sandaime questioned whether concealing the boy's ancestry was the right thing to do, not for the first time that day. "Minato, if you were me, how would you respond?" There was no doubt that Naruto was in danger. Naruto was too young to defend himself, and Iwa would want retribution. The Anbu guards in his office were the only ones who heard the tortured man whisper, "I am sorry, Naruto. I am protecting you as best as I can." The Sandaime touched the window glass behind the desk and said, "Minato." After that, he took a seat and started writing a law. Naruto's heritage and his burden would become an SS class secret under this law. They would protect Naruto. Lily was pressuring Minato to take a nap, and he had just fallen asleep. He had just turned out the light and was lying in his bed when the door opened, but he didn't mind because he was tired. James asked, "Min, you asleep yet?" James said, "No, come in, James." He entered the room and shut the door, leaving it dark. "I wanted to ask you about something you said when you first woke up in St. Mungo's." Minato gave a nod. James winced at the suggestion. "About Kushina or the fact that I shouldn't have been there?" Nodding, Minato said, Both." James blushed, clearly having given it some thought. "I actually expected you to confront me sooner. I need to give you some background first. You know about the elemental nations and the hidden countries, correct?" James replied. "I am from Konohagakure, the village hidden in leaves. It is located in Hai no Kuni, the land of fire. I was actually made the 4th Hokage not too long ago, but that's not important. What is important is that on October 9th, Kushina went into labor. The morning of October 10th, after a long night, she gave birth to Naruto. Within minutes of his birth, a man in an orange mask ripped the Kyuubi out of Kushina due to the seal holding in the beast being weak. The man set it loose on Konoha. Kushina knew she was dying and that Konoha was losing several hundred of its ninja to the thing." Minato stopped to take a sip of water. Minato was crying at this point. "I fought the demon. I was forced to use a deadly seal to seal it away. I had to seal it into Naruto. I sealed half of its chakra into me. Just as I was sealing it, the demon clawed me and Kushina and I ended up waking up on that hospital bed." James was also in tears. Minato nodded and said, "So Kush.ne, Chan really is gone?" "I'm sorry." Minato's apology infuriated James. "Why the hell are you sorry? It's not you who should be sorry. You did all you could to protect that village of yours from that demon. I think the person who should be sorry is that masked man." Minato gazed at James in disbelief. James scowled at him and said, "So you don't blame me for Kushina dying? You weren't responsible for it. You didn't plan it. Why should I be mad at you?" Minato smiled weakly at James. James turned and hurried out of the room, saying, "Go to sleep minimum, I'll see you in the morning." Minato was somewhat perplexed as she watched the door close. He had been ready for James to accuse him of being responsible for Kushina's death. Hell, he put the blame on himself. Staring at the ceiling, he reclined on the pillows. "Oh, Kushina-chan. You and Naru-kun are missed." James hurried down the stairs. He looked into the living room and said, "Lils? Are you in here?" Indeed, she was there. James simply shook his head in response to his wife's inquiries, saying, "What's wrong? James, you can't fool me. I know something is wrong." Before Lily could ask any questions, James turned and made his way to the old martial arts studio. "Nothing. Lils, really. I'm going to be in the old martial arts studio I had built here. That's where I'll be if you need me." Lily's eyes were hurt as she watched James walk out of the room. "James. What is causing you such pain? Why are you unable to explain the issue to me?" With a sigh, she returned to her work. When he was ready, James would let her know. Wham! James smashed a second training dummy into a wall and exclaimed, The siding had cracks from the dummy's forceful impact. Thanks to a sealing array that Kushina had taught him, the cracks started to fill themselves as soon as they appeared. It was among the final lessons she had given him. James had a vivid memory of that day. The attack on the village had occurred on that day. Flashback. Kushina, where did you go? Kushina, James exclaimed as he meandered through the trees in Uzushiogakura's central plaza. Damn it. Where are you? He sat on a tree stump and let out a frustrated sigh. Hey! Exclaimed James as he tumbled down from the stump and scowled at the redhead's smile. James complained, Do you have to do that? Kushina lifted him up by reaching down. James pulled a face and said, Of course I do. You're my cousin. You promised you'd teach me something cool. Kushina was permitted to begin her ninja training because she was a year ahead of James in school and knew more about sealing than he did. Kushina grinned and said, I did, didn't I? I know, I'll teach you a seal so that you won't destroy your training grounds as you get older. James was brought back to their shared residence by Kushina. James lived with his cousin Kushina after his parents passed away soon after he was born. Take out some regular paper and a brush. I'm going to teach you the seal first, then you'll practice. When you want to apply it to a ground, you can write it on seal paper. James smiled. James was drilled until he was flawless by Kushina, who gradually guided him through the brushstroke technique. As she started to say, Good, now I'll teach you, an Uzushio shinobi rushed into the room. Gather anything you might want to save. Now, both of you. Kushina's father's voice was heard, and both of them complied. He then arranged for them to flee via a tunnel designed especially for village evacuation. They had spent several hours running. Both of them were worn out and not paying much attention to their destination when they finally stopped. James had fallen into a tiny crack as a result of this, which neither had observed. James! Kushina exclaimed. James! When a wave of vertigo overcame James, he sat up and moaned, Wah, Lily? Oh, James! Thank goodness you're okay, James exclaimed as she realized she wasn't alone in the room. Minato and Sirius were peering over Lily's shoulder with concern. I'm fine. Lily. Lils. Lily, was shouted so loudly that it prevented her from crying. Really, I'm fine. Just a flashback, nothing major. Nothing major, my left buttock, Lily and James said, gazing at Sirius. Lily, who had never seen Sirius act so gravely, looked at him and said, James, you were suffering from acute exhaustion and we couldn't get you to wake up. That you would think it's nothing major is a cause for concern. When Sirius saw Lily gazing at him, he posed. He smiled at her and said, Like what you see. Lily simply rolled her eyes and looked back at James. You were out for almost an hour after we found you. We were seriously considering flow.ing St. Mungos if you didn't wake up when you did. James hugged her tightly. Minato placed his hand on Lily's back and nodded, saying, I really am alright, Lils. You need to trust me on this. If he's anything like Kushina, then he is perfectly fine. We can watch him for a while if it makes you feel better. Lily gave a nod. Okay, Minato. But no roughhousing. James, I wanted to take Harry to play with Neville for a little while. I'll be back by supper, okay? James grinned. They stood after James kissed her and said, Of course you can, Lils. It's perfectly fine with me. We can hold down the fort for a few hours, right guys? Not to mention I'll probably go to sleep right after she leaves. Lily gave him another kiss and went to fetch Harry, saying, You have a fine time at Frank and Alice's. I'll see you when you come home. James was cornered by Minato and Sirius as soon as she left. James sighed as Minato smiled at Sirius's suggestion. So, you gonna tell us what was really wrong with you, or do we have to prank it out of you? The evening was going to be long. Every significant figure in the Order of the Phoenix that Minato needed to know was introduced to him over the course of the following few months. He purchased an apartment as well. He could still clearly recall that argument. Flashback. Minato could see that James was frowning as he said, "Min, I still don't understand why you want to get your own apartment. Potter Manor has all the protections you need and it has plenty of space." James had practiced this line of thought several times. "James, I've already told you. You and Lily need your own space. I wouldn't feel comfortable staying at the manor with you. Besides, you can always come and see me. It's not like I won't come over to your home at least once a week." Minato breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't like he needed to borrow money from James and Lily to purchase an apartment anyhow, since he had joined the Aura Corps shortly after waking up because he needed the money and was reasonably skilled at fighting and dueling. Minato had the option to purchase an apartment without informing the couple. Lily had now joined the argument, as if sensing this. Her statement deflated James. "James, let it go. He needs his own freedom too. You can't expect your cousin to want to live with you forever." After all, this was accurate. He did not have to defend Minato like a baby. James had asked him, even though he already knew the answer, "Yeah, I guess. Come visit often, okay Min?" James smiled and said, "Of course I will. I already told you that, and I wouldn't miss playing with Harry for the world." "Just checking. So, where were you planning to get an apartment at?" "Yes, where?" Since Minato had no idea where to look, James and Lily had assisted him in finding an apartment in Godric's Hollow, a mixed wizarding Muggle village where they owned some property, with the aid of the Gringotts goblins. He reasoned that it was so they could visit and see how he was doing frequently. It was strange for him to join the Order. He didn't trust Albus Dumbledore with his life. Literally, but he also wanted to help Lily and James. He simply got the impression that the man liked to keep his secrets too close. With clients like that, Minato's missions were typically unsuccessful. In his study, Minato leaned against the window and rubbed his eyes wearily. It would be 9 months since he was dragged from Konoha to London in a week. He was sorely missing Naruto. Naruto deserved better. He was losing too much of his child's life. He had succeeded in persuading James that he must travel to Konoha to learn how to retrieve his child on his own. Minato had prevailed in the argument with James. Tomorrow, he was heading out. After settling into his desk chair, Minato started writing a letter. Although Minato had a bank account in Konoha, James would be a little miffed. The money wasn't necessary for him. "Min?" Minato jumped out of his seat and spun around so fast that he knocked the completed letter off his desk. James grinned and said, "James, what are you doing here? What happened?" "Lily was worrying because you didn't come to the Order meeting last night." Minato looked up. James took his arm and turned him to face the window, asking, "Last night? What, outside, it was light." Minato sighed. "What time is it, James?" He must have dozed off at his desk once more. Minato rubbed his eyes wearily and said, "It is just after 8 in the morning." James nodded and departed through the flow, leaving Minato to get ready. "Tell Lily I'll be over in an hour. I need to get cleaned up and make sure my bag is packed. I want to say goodbye to you guys before I leave." Minato rapped his head on the desk as soon as James was gone. "Oh, what was I up to in a previous life? Why is everything so difficult these days?" After stretching, he proceeded to clean up in the restroom. Konoha. I'm coming. In his apartment, Jiraiya of the legendary Sannin sat on the edge of a crib. A tiny baby with bright yellow hair was in the crib. Even though Jiraiya didn't want to wake the sleeping child, you couldn't ignore the Hokage's message because it was a message. He hefted the young child into his arms and said, "Naruto, it's time to get up." The baby opened his vivid blue eyes and said, "It's time to go see my sensei." You resemble Minato more and more every day. As he dressed and changed the child, the ninja thought, the only difference is the whiskers. Jiraiya shunshined them to the Hokage Tower as soon as they were both prepared. The receptionist scowled at the infant in Jiraiya's arms and said, "Meeting with the Sandame." She was about to turn them down when she heard a voice she recognized. The old Sandame stood at the bottom of the twisting staircase and said, "Jiraiya, come on in." Jiraiya glared at the receptionist as he walked by, saying, "Hi, Sarutobi, sensei." Jiraiya swallowed when the Sandame activated a secrecy seal as soon as they arrived at the office. "It wasn't a request. I need you to reactivate your spy network." Jiraiya abruptly stopped talking when the Sandame glared at him, saying, "I can't leave Naruto, sensei. The villagers would kill the boy." The icy tone made Jiraiya wince. I am well aware of the possibilities. Even though his heart was breaking, the Sandaime hardened his face and said, "He's all I have left, sensei." Jiraiya sighed and moved the sleeping bundle, saying, "I'm sorry, Jiraiya. It needs to be done. Konoha cannot be left without a functioning spy system for very much longer." Jiraiya gave a sorrowful nod and handed Naruto over to the Sandaime, saying, "If it helps, the child will be able to enter the academy when he is 5 and you are allowed to visit him wherever he is placed." The Sannin got up and faced the window, saying, "I will take care of him, Jiraiya. Go." He looked back at the young child and disappeared. The child had grabbed his ear and pulled, saying, "It's just us now, Naruto. Ouch." The Sandaime grinned. Children will always be kids. The Sandaime Hokage called a council meeting nearly 9 months after the attack. The Sandaime nodded as the reasons were explained. The meeting of July 7th is now in session. Matters of attention are the placement of the child and repairs of the village. The civilian side of the council scowled at the young child in the Sandaime's arms, while the ninja side nodded. Uzumaki Naruto is the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. His godfather, Jiraiya of the Sannin, is out of the village at present to continue village matters. Uzumaki now needs somewhere to live. The civilians nodded in agreement with the suggestion, which, ironically, originated from the same side of the room. "Why don't we just kill the brat and be done with it?" One of the weaker ninja clan leaders said, "Why don't we just kill you and be done with it?" The civilians blanched as the other ninja nodded in agreement. "Then we won't have to listen to your incessant whining?" With a sigh, the Sandaime pinched the bridge of his nose. "Settle down." There was silence on both sides. The civilians appeared mutinous, but the clans were happy. "I already know where I will place him for now. He will be placed in the civilian orphanage until he is either adopted or turns 5. At that point, he will then be placed either in an approved apartment or with a ninja clan. All the clans will gain from this solution, and if they so choose, they could adopt the child. Although they don't appear to be very happy, the civilian side of the council would be something to keep an eye on." Unaware of the decisions being made that would determine his childhood, the little blonde child slept on in the elderly Sandaime's arms. 4 years later, time has passed. Although it wasn't the ideal environment for growing up, the orphanage was preferable to the harsh, frigid streets. It was for everyone who wasn't named Uzumaki Naruto, at least. The matron of the orphanage had given the 4-year-old a tattered blanket when he was 2 years old, and he shivered beneath it. All of the street kids were in the orphanages, hiding from the bitterly cold winds during the worst winter Konoha had seen in years. Every child but one. With a shiver, Naruto turned over on the flimsy cot that had been set up for him to sleep on in the shed. "I'm really chilly. Mom, Dad, help me." The poor little kid, not realizing how close his help was, fell into a cold, restless sleep. Time skip in a narrow ravine. Minato Namikaze paced back and forth. The glowing blue barrier, visible only to the select few who succeeded in becoming Kage, was about 2 feet from him. Damn it. The barrier should have been insurmountable. The barrier was aware of his chakra. He was from the hidden countries, and it knew it. However, it was as sturdy as a wall made of bricks. He paused and struck the wall with a punch. Under his fist, the barrier wavered but remained firm. The sharp, stinging pain tore through his thumb, making him wince. His thumb was nearly immediately healed as he clenched his fists and tugged on Kyuubi's chakra. Minato scowled at the obstacle, then he let out a sigh. "Guess I better set up camp." Watching Minato go, James sighed. "Lily?" Lily emerged from the doorway. "Yes, James?" sighed James. "Why'd I get the feeling that I won't ever see Minato again?" Lily sighed. "I don't know, James. Are you sure you're not just upset about him leaving? He is your cousin after all." James gave a nod. They had made the decision to relocate to their house in Godric's Hollow. "Maybe you're right. How's the packing going?" Every day, Voldemort drew nearer. Compared to Potter Manor, it was smaller and might be better protected. "I just need to do a few more things and then it'll be done," James grinned. "You need any help?" Lily asked with a sorrowful shake of her head. "No, James. You could go and fly with Harry for a while. I give you permission this time." She grinned. With a whoop, James dashed to Harry's sleeping quarters in the playroom. As Lily watched them leave, she muttered, "Boys." She then returned her attention to the boxes in the adjacent room. As James flew past the window, she exclaimed, "Love you, Lily," with laughter. October 31st time skip as she cleaned up yet another mess Harry's magic had created. Lily sighed. "Need help, Lils?" Lily shook her head while grinning. "He's getting really big now, James. Already flying, starting to walk, talking a little as well." Her expression was teary. James gave his wife a sorrowful smile and embraced her, saying, "I'm afraid, James. It'll be okay, Lils. It's dangerous, yes, but we are doing the best we can. That's all we can do. Now, I got a letter from Min today. He said he is trying to get through a barrier but that it will take some time. He doesn't know when he'll be back but he said it might be soon." Lily grinned. She returned her attention to the mess and said, "That's great, James." It was quickly cleaned with James's assistance. James followed Lily to the living room after the two stretched. In his playpen, Harry was fast asleep. "I'll take him up to bed, James. Then we can have some time together, right?" James grinned. Lily pivoted and made her way upstairs. Wham! A burst of red light erupted from the door. James yelled, "Lily, take Harry and leave. It's him. Go," as Lily bolted up the stairs. Lord Voldemort entered the tiny living room as she was about to move out of the way. Lily ran to the back bedroom and whispered to Harry, "Harry, we have to be quiet. Everything's going to be all right." "Shush." She blocked the door with a wave of her wand. The sound of the stairs creaking made her wince. "No." She dropped Harry into his crib and started casting, tears streaming from her emerald green eyes. The door exploded and the barricade collapsed as she finished. Lily Potter held up her wand, ready to cast swiftly as Lord Voldemort stepped into the tiny bedroom. The cold voice of Voldemort chilled her to the core. "Move aside, you silly little girl. I do not need to kill you. I will never abandon my son. You will get your filthy hands on him over my dead body." Lily's expression widened. After saying, "Very well. Avada Kedavra," the snake-faced man turned to face the child. The young boy started to cry as Voldemort turned his wand on him. What a waste of intelligent life. I would have spared her. Goodbye, Harry Potter. Unaware of the child's cries, the dark wizard also started to glow. Avada Kedavra. Minato sighed and took a seat. 5 years. He had been trying to break through the foolish barrier for that long. It was really annoying. He inhaled deeply and let out a sigh. He had tried everything, from low-ranked jutsus to the most intricate ceiling arrays, but nothing had worked. A while back, he had begun talking to himself because he was bored. "Naruto. You're 5 today. I wish I could see you." Sometimes putting his ideas into words helped. Out of the corner of his eye, Minato noticed movement as he was speaking, and he turned to confront it. Nothing. Nothing visible, anyway. Before he gasped, Minato frowned slightly as he tried to understand what had changed. It had vanished. The barrier had finally collapsed. "Naruto." Minato grinned as he hurried to pack his camp with a seal. "Here he is, Konoha." As quickly as his short legs would allow, Uzumaki Naruto was sprinting through the streets. He was closely followed by a group of inebriated villagers. "Die, demon. Kill him." Naruto ran more quickly while dodging the rocks and bottles. In an attempt to flee, he ducked into an alley. Damn. Dead. When he turned, he saw a drunken crowd. He flinched and squatted, anticipating the blows. They never showed up. Rather, a tall, blond man wearing a white coat stood over a heap of moaning villagers. Naruto winced as the man turned to face him and said, "Pieces of crap. Can't believe I fought to protect you." The man said in a soothing, calm voice, "Easy there, buddy, I'm not going to hurt you." Naruto became suspicious right away. Naruto shook his head and winced once more as the man reached out to touch him. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Naruto gave him a dejected smile and said, "It's okay, I'm just going to pick you up. I think I'm going to take this to the Hokage." Minato scowled before grinning piteously at the young child and saying, G can't do anything. The council Dislee hates me. We'll go anyway." They disappeared in a whirlpool of leaves after the man weighed Naruto in his arms, only to resurface at the Hokage tower. After placing the boy on the ground, Minato persuaded him to follow her into the tower. Without raising her gaze, the receptionist droning, "Do you have an appointment?" "No." She raised her head now. When Minato put a 3-pronged kunai to her throat, she quickly stopped saying, "That demon isn't allowed in here. Irk." Even though she was crying, she nodded and said, "We are here to see the Hokage. You will show us in." A wise old man walked into the room and said, "No need, I am here. Please, let her go and follow me." Minato followed the Sandame after taking Naruto's hand. The Sandame gestured to a few chairs in front of the oak desk and sat down as soon as they were in the office. "Now, I see you have found Naruto. Am I allowed to know the nature of your visit?" Minato sighed. The Sandame's eyes grew wide as he said, "I'm not pleased with the way he's been treated, Hiruzen. It's not possible. I witnessed his demise." "Minimum, Minato. Minato asked, lowering the hood he had worn prior to avoiding the crowd. Naruto quickly made the connection and gasped, the very same, sensei. I won't be staying for very long though. I don't think I could protect a village that has nearly killed my son. I'm your son? Minato asked, grinning as he looked at the young child and raised him back into his arms. Naruto was sobbing and giving Minato a tight hug when he said, yes, and I have been trying to get to you for 5 years. The Sandaime steered the discussion back on course. I understand, Minato. Will you tell me what happened when the Kyuubi attacked? Minato sighed and explained everything, including his 5 years of work. Sarutobi grinned, but the smile did not reach his eyes. So you were camped outside the barrier not knowing if you would ever get through? You have some strong resolve, Minato. Minato nodded and said, it's strange that the barrier would not let him back through. I think I will take and raise Naruto back in England. If he's anything like me, he will turn out to be magical as well. The Sandaime gave a nod. I am also planning to train him as a ninja. He will take his exams when he is ready. I will leave a place for him and a note for my successor when I choose the right one. I also don't blame you. One last thing. How do you think I should explain this to the council, because I have no doubt that you will want to leave immediately? Minato pondered this for a moment. Minato got up, holding a sleeping Naruto, and said, just tell them the truth without any of the specifics. Tell them that I was on a long-term mission or something and decided to resign from the village. It's your choice. He shook Sarutobi's hand and turned on his portkey, saying, I will keep in touch with you, sensei. Send me a message if you ever need help. Maybe I will eventually return. Naruto and Minato were dropped off at Minato's apartment in Godric's Hollow by the portkey. Carrying Naruto to the bedroom reserved for him 5 years prior, Minato steadied himself from the journey. Buddy, I will get you some pajamas tomorrow. This is your room. It will always be your room for as long as we live here, okay? The drowsy kid grinned. Naruto nodded and quickly dozed off in the large bed. Go to sleep. I'll be here in the morning. As he walked out of the room, Minato turned off the light, leaving only the dim glow of a night light. He rubbed his stubble and grinned to himself as he carried out his plan, saying, I need to shower and go to bed myself. Damn. I haven't slept in a bed for 5 years. Wow. In a cupboard beneath the stairs, a small, dark-haired child in another part of England was sobbing himself to sleep. His uncle's brutal beatings had left him covered in welts and bruises. Only a few weeks ago, he discovered that the child's name was Harry Potter. He had begun school for the first time at that time. Since he had brought home his first report card, he was now locked in the cupboard beneath the stairs. It was common for kids to receive punishment for their report cards, but it was uncommon for them to receive punishment for doing well, and Harry had performed admirably. After saying, the little freak must have cheated, there is no way for him to have beaten Dudley, his uncle had taken his report card and thrown it into the fireplace. His aunt wasn't any better. Harry was constantly punished for things he didn't do and forced to complete the tasks she assigned him. He was not permitted to inquire, particularly about his parents, and he would face consequences if he did. Don't ask questions. One of his numerous cuts reopened and the boy groaned. Help! Naruto was lifted off the bed and placed on his feet by Minato. Naruto blinked and yawned, saying, time to get up, sleepyhead. Why? I'm too sleepy. Minato grinned. Naruto yawned once more but nodded. We have to go shopping today, Naruto-kun. I need to get you some new clothes and we need information. Food? Minato asked the young child with a smile. Naruto grinned broadly and said, yes, breakfast first. We have to go out for it though, there's no food here. Minato laughed. Ramen? Like Kushina, exactly. Naruto pouted before smiling once more. Sorry buddy, but I don't think there is any ramen here. I do know a nice place where I can get you some good food though. Ignoring the little flinch, Minato picked Naruto up and said, okay, before outlining their route. Now, you were almost asleep when I did this last night, so I want you to listen carefully. You should never let go of either me or the portkey. If you do, you could end up seriously injured and lost. Okay. Naruto gave a nod. They said, good. Now, hold tight, and left. Minato carried the small child into the leaky cauldron while holding Naruto slightly higher on his hip. He had to hold Naruto to prevent the child from being crushed in the crowd because Diagon Alley was busier than he had remembered. Minato approached the bar and said hello to Tom, the bartender. Naruto was starting to feel anxious around everyone, so Minato requested a private room and breakfast. Tom nodded and led them to their parlor. Thank you, Tom. Oh, and do you have a recent paper I can read? I've been out of the country for several years now and would like to get caught up on events. Minato nodded and seated Naruto in a chair, saying, I'll be right back. Naruto winced and said, Naruto-kun, will you tell me what your life was like in Konoha? You don't have to if you don't want to. I just want you to talk about it and get the feelings to go away, Naruto said with a grimace. Naruto said, I'll tell you. Minato paced the room while he spoke, frequently pausing to glare at the fireplace. Minato halted and gaped at Naruto, asking, Are you mad at me, daddy? No number, I am not mad at you, Naruto-kun. You are not the reason why I am mad. I am mad at the village. You didn't do anything wrong. You were the victim. Naruto gave his father a hug. Minato gave him a hug back and said, Love you. I love you too, my sweet child. Your breakfast. Tom, the bartender, came in with a large tray filled with food. He extended a newspaper to Minato and said, And your newspaper. Minato pushed Naruto, who had hid behind Minato when he saw the man, and said, Thank you. Naruto muttered, Thank you. With a smile, Tom bowed and left the room. Minato loaded a plate with food and opened the newspaper, saying, Eat as much as you want to, Naru. You're gonna need your strength today. A big photo of a child that might have been his nephew was on the front page, but it didn't look quite right. Harry Potter marks his 5th birthday. All right. Seeing his son eat, Minato thought cynically, I thought that James and Lily would have kept Harry out of the spotlight. As he watched the young boy play with some of his food before consuming it, he grinned. Today is Harry Potter's 5th birthday, also known as the boy who lived. We at the Daily Prophet would like to wish him a very happy birthday and a prosperous new year. Minato grimaced and rolled his eyes at the paper. What was printed there sounded less like a news article and more like the letters he would receive from daimyos requesting a favor. Oh no. In this article, where are James and Lily? Why is Harry in a paper at all, for that matter? Watching Naruto sigh and set down his fork, Minato pondered. Daddy. Minato raised an eyebrow at him. There was still more than half of the plate of food left, so Naruto nodded and flushed. Full? Naruto smiled, and Minato rubbed his son's head before picking him up. All right, let's go down and talk to Tom. See if I can get an older newspaper. This one doesn't have much information. Then I will take and get you some new clothes and some new toys. All right with you? Naruto said. Naruto cheered and laughed as Minato carried him downstairs. And, maybe, we can stop and see about getting you some ice cream? He asked. Tom stood at the bar by the stairs and asked, Did you enjoy your breakfast, sirs? We did. Thank you. Do you happen to know if I can get a hold of any older newspapers around here, Tom? I haven't been in the country since the early 1980s. Tom smiled. Can't get you a newspaper, but I can get you plenty of information. That do. Minato gave a wink. Tom nodded once before Naruto and Minato departed. Thank you for your help, Tom. I'll be back around 5. Minato helped Naruto get dressed for 3 long hours, and then the two of them spent 2 more hours eating ice cream and exploring a toy store before Minato finally carried an exhausted Naruto back to the leaky cauldron. Tom nodded and gestured for Minato to follow him up the stairs and into the parlor they had been in earlier in the day. Hello, Tom. After placing a dozing Naruto in a chair, Minato grabbed another for himself. Minato grinned wryly at the pile of papers before him and said, I got the information you wanted. Everything from January 1980.1 to yesterday. Thank you again, Tom. Tom gave a headshake. No problem of mine. You and your boys seem like you've both been to hell and back. Minato laughed. Tom nodded, escorted them back downstairs, and Minato took Naruto home via the flow system. I think it's time for me to tuck Naru into bed. I will see you again soon, Tom. Minato sighed and sat down at his desk after tucking Naruto into bed. Another long night was ahead of him. Minato stared at the article in front of him, his hands clenched in rage. He desired to detonate something. Destroy something completely, preferably something shaped like the head of Albus Dumbledore. Why in the world didn't he at least inform me that something had happened by sending me a letter or something? I could still get mail from my current location, I ought to have been told. He got to his feet and started pacing while furiously raking his hand through his hair. Minato was aware that he was probably not being allowed to take care of his second cousin. There was a problem with the way this was developing. Sirius Black is incarcerated. How on earth did that occur? Minato was aware that Sirius would pursue anyone who posed a threat to James and Lily, no matter what. Minato slammed his hand on the desk beside him, saying, This makes no sense. Daddy? Minato's 5-year-old son's voice made him start violently. Minato glanced at his watch and said, 2:30 in the morning. Naruto bit his lip. Naruto. What are you doing up? It's. Minato sighed and said, I had a nightmare. Come here, buddy. Let's see if we can make it go away. Grimacing at the condition of the tiny room, Minato led Naruto back to his room and rocked him back to sleep. There were too many ghosts of his past here, so they had to leave as soon as possible. After removing the final box from the truck, Minato carried it into the four-bedroom home he had purchased a few days earlier. Naruto had already entered and was probably selecting his bedroom. There was a shout from upstairs, "Naru? Where did you run off to?" After putting the box down, Minato went to check on his son and make sure he was okay. Before a yellow streak appeared in a doorway to his right, he had reached the landing. "Did you pick your bedroom?" Minato asked, closely observing Naruto as the young child shook his head. He saw Naruto's face light up as the child scurried back into the room he had just left. "Well, do you have a specific one you like?" he asked. Minato trailed after him. Minato looked into the other rooms and said, "Okay Naruto. You can have this room. The smallest one would be his office, the restroom at the end of the hall, Naruto's room across the hall from Minato's office, and Minato's room on the opposite side of the office. A guest room would be created out of the final bedroom." The young blonde poked his head out of his room and said, "Naruto?" While Minato began unpacking the living room and kitchen from storage scrolls, Naruto nodded and went back to playing in his room. "This is my room, okay?" he asked. When the doorbell rang, Minato had just finished unpacking the majority of the living room and noting what he needed to buy. He remembered not to fully open the door until he was certain the visitor wasn't dangerous after hearing Naruto descend the stairs behind him as he opened it. When he saw a woman with a horse face and a fancy dress carrying something in a pan wrapped in foil, he opened the door all the way. "Hello, I am Petunia Dursley. I live in number 4. I thought I would be the first to greet you as one of your new neighbors." Minato sighed inwardly. She's more likely to be the first to spread rumors. However, Minato watched the woman critically eye the moving boxes as she smiled and invited her into the living room. Instead of a couch, they had a black, foldable futon, which Naruto was sitting on. As she placed the object on the coffee table and reached for Naruto, who had frozen, Minato winced and asked, "And who is this cute little boy?" Minato was between them in a matter of seconds, saying, "Please don't touch my son. He has had a very rough life for the past few years and I believe you are scaring him." The woman stopped, gave Minato a cautious look, and then moved away. Minato hesitated before Naruto responded, "I apologize. What is your son's name?" He demonstrated his claim by holding up 5 fingers, saying, "I am Naruto and I am 5. "Ah, well it was nice to meet you Minato. I hope we can meet for dinner at some point." Minato gave a wink. Petunia nodded and grinned, saying, "Maybe tonight. No plans anyway, not to mention food. See you tonight." Minato led her to the door, and he moaned as she walked out. Naruto turned to Minato and said, "Dear Kami, that woman made me want to scream." Minato gently ruffled his son's hair and said, "I didn't like her either, Daddy." "Well, she brought us something and so we should see what it is, shouldn't we?" Naruto said with a grin. "I bet it is some kind of jello. Why stuff that wiggles if you poke it," Minato chuckled. Naruto pouted and Minato carried it to the kitchen, saying, "I don't think it's jello Naruto." The pork roast was steaming when they removed the tin foil together. Naruto also sniffed the air and said, That smells really good." Minato nodded and looked for a knife and the loaf of bread he had purchased earlier in the day. "Can we have some now, Daddy?" he asked. He eventually located it, and the two of them had a lunch of hot roast beef sandwiches. Petunia walked into her immaculate home's foyer. "Boy," she said, jerking the cabinet open. She gave him a slap on the back of the head just for good measure. "I invited our new neighbors over for dinner tonight. You will make a steak and mushroom sauce dinner with something nice on the side. I am going with Vernon and Dudley to get them ties. You better not screw up," she said. With a grimace, Harry hurried into the kitchen and started gathering ingredients. Cookbook, "Ah, here it is," he exclaimed as he hurriedly climbed onto a stool and picked up the bulky book. Then Harry whispered to himself, "Steak and mushroom. Okay, I can have this done quickly." Before long, Petunia was back, followed by Dudley and Vernon. "Not done yet. They will be here any minute," Harry said, removing the steaks from the oven while dodging a blow. He ignored his aunt's glare and began setting out plates for 5, saying, "They're done now." Just as the doorbell rang, he placed the steaming dish of steaks covered in mushroom sauce in the center of the table. Harry backed into a corner and attempted to merge with the wall without anyone noticing. As Dudley led the new neighbors into the dining room, neither his aunt nor his uncle noticed that he was still there, so it must have worked out pretty well. One of them was clearly an adult, and the other could only be his son. They were almost the same, both with yellow hair. Petunia and Vernon sat on opposite ends of the table. while Harry observed them sitting in seats directly next to each other on one side. Dudley occupied a whole side of the table by himself. Harry saw his aunt go pale as she considered the question. This looks delicious. What is it, Petunia? It's fair that she didn't know. Petunia could hardly recall what she had Harry prepare. It is steak smothered in mushroom sauce. Before serving herself, Petunia gave a plate to each person at the table and said, "It looks delectable." Before they started eating, the new neighbor man and the young boy who had accompanied him exchanged a strange look. The man explained after taking a few bites, so Petunia must have given him a strange look. Harry noticed Vernon narrow his eyes and said, "Itadakimasu basically means let's eat. I say this before I eat because I am originally from Japan and my son was raised there." Vernon disliked foreigners. Petunia went white, and Harry suppressed a gasp as memories danced across his eyes. "I don't believe I have formally introduced myself. I am Minato Namikaze and this is my son Naruto." He had the same yellow hair as the guest seated at the table, and Harry noticed him laughing at something while clinging to a wall. A visitor who seemed to have excellent hearing. Minato scowled and asked, "What was that noise?" Vernon was pale and asked, "What noise?" They would have to relocate if this neighbor found out their secret. There would be no turning back now. It sounded like a gasp. The man got to his feet and turned to face the wall behind him, gasping slightly at what he saw. "Oh dear Cammy. Harry. Harry." The child with black hair stiffened and froze, anticipating the inevitable blow. Rather, the man who was holding him gave him a soft embrace. Minato put the trembling child down on his discarded chair and turned to glare at the Dursleys, saying, "Dear Cammy, I've been looking everywhere for you." Petunia winced. "What in Merlin's name have you done to my cousin?" But Vernon's face turned purple and his eyes narrowed. Minato's fists began to sparkle as she exclaimed, "That freak had it coming to him, when his ungrateful parents offed themselves and he was dumped here." Freak. His voice and eyes froze, and the windows trembled with the energy surge. "Harry is not a freak. You have treated a child, one placed in your care, harmfully. A magical child nonetheless. No child should be treated like you have treated your nephew." Minato practically radiated strength. The child whispered, "My parents killed themselves." Minato turned to see his son clinging to Harry's arm, and his eyes softened. "They as good as did." Petunia appeared to have regained some of her composure and courage. The screech made Harry wince. "They did not," Minato said in a deadly quiet voice. "James and Lily died as heroes. Not the worthless trash you seem to be." In the midst of the confusion, Minato heard Naruto start whispering to Harry, and she was happy to see that they were becoming closer. Harry smiled sadly at him and said, "Daddy is awesome. He saved me from bad people. I think he is saving you too." Minato suddenly lost control of his magic, causing glassware on the table to explode. The two boys had been subjected to treatment that no child should have had to go through. Minato shot the elder Dursleys with a look of rage on his face, and the two vanished. Dudley nodded, trembling and covered in glass cuts. "Dudley, call your aunt. Tell her that your parents are in jail and that you need to be picked up. I will be taking Harry back to my home. You are not to ever come near my house. Clear?" he said. After giving one nod, Minato turned to face the two kids standing behind him. Naruto glanced at Harry and asked, "Are either of you hurt?" The two shook their heads. Naruto turned to face Harry, and the two nodded once more. "Good. I need to heal Dudley and we need to get his aunt here as soon as possible." When Naruto gave a slight no, Minato turned to face Harry, who sighed but nodded once more. "Naruto, can you help Harry collect anything he might want to take with him?" Minato asked. Minato turned and said, "I'll be right back you two." Then, with a flick of his wand, the glass began to disappear and the kitchen started to mend itself. "My name is Naruto." Naruto gave Harry a cautious smile, and Harry returned the shy smile. Naruto grinned broadly and said, "I'm Harry. I'm 5. Suddenly, Naruto became serious. "I'm 5 too. Maybe we have the same birthdays," he said. Harry turned slightly pale but gave a firm nod when he said, "Now, Daddy said we need to rescue your stuff. Will you show me where it is?" Harry led Naruto to the cupboard beneath the stairs, saying, "Follow me." The question, "This is your room?" shocked Naruto. Harry winced. With his eyes still fixed on the cupboard, Naruto said, "Wow Harry. They really didn't like you, did they?" Naruto blinked and gave Harry a perplexed look. "If you don't want to help me, you don't have to. I mean, you're only doing this because your dad is forcing you to." Naruto was on the verge of tears when he asked, "You mean, you don't really want to be my friend?" Harry looked at Naruto and asked, "You really want to be my friend?" Naruto blinked away the tears and said, "I've never had a friend before." Me neither. Naruto yanked at the cabinet door. This time, Harry grinned broadly and held up a key. This cupboard is locked. Do you know how to open it? Harry asked. Harry swiftly removed the lock, and the two boys were inside shortly after. It's locked from the outside. I can open it with Uncle Vernon's key. The two soon heard footsteps coming from the dining room and a noise coming from the front door. When they peered out of the cabinet, they noticed Naruto's father chatting with someone at the door. Harry growled softly, "That's Aunt Marge. She has a really mean dog." Naruto shrugged and watched with interest. Dudley. Minato's abrupt shout and Dudley's thumping footsteps from the dining room startled the boys. The two saw Naruto's father stick his head into the cupboard and heard some arguments and Dudley's departure. "Almost done here, Daddy." Naruto grinned broadly at Minato. Minato smiled back and summoned a small box, into which he started to place the items. "Very good, boys." After shrinking the box, he lifted the two of them with ease. Naruto exclaimed, "Time for you to see your new home, Harry," and talked endlessly about how much Harry would adore it. As this was going on, Minato's mind strayed. Hokage Tower, Konohagakure. Hokage. Sama. Ibiki Morino stepped into the tower, and the Sandaime Hokage looked up. "Yes, Ibiki?" Ibiki was the head of the Department of Torture and Investigation, so it must have been significant. Information gathering was his responsibility, and he hardly ever left the department he oversaw. Sarutobi squeezed the bridge of his nose between his thumb and forefinger and said, "I just had two people appear in one of my empty holding cells. One of them was a very overweight male and the other a very underweight female. Wait just a minute where you are." The Sandaime pulled out what looked like a standard mirror from a drawer. Ibiki watched in disbelief as the face of a man he believed to be deceased materialized in the mirror. "Minato." "Yes, Saru?" With a wild smile, Minato asked, "Did you happen to send two people to our T&I department? They deserve nothing less than to suffer for their crimes. You know how I had a cousin through Kushina?" Sarutobi grinned. Sarutobi saw Ibiki's face change from one of shock at seeing the Yondaime alive to one of horror and disgust at what was being said. "Well, apparently, they died 5 years ago. I didn't know as I was still trying to find a way into Konoha. They had a son named Harry. Those bastards sitting in your cells abused my second cousin so badly, he didn't know his name until a few weeks ago and slept in a cupboard under the stairs. You know you can always come back if you need it, right, Minato?" Minato gave a wink. "It won't be anytime soon, but I will come back to visit within 10 years, Sarutobi murmured. "It's for the best." After a little more conversation, they hung up as a quiet child began to cry in the background. As Ibiki walked away with a savage grin, Sarutobi grinned grimly and said, "Ibiki, I give you permission to do whatever it takes for them to be terrified of ever going near another child. They'll get theirs. Kami, help us when Minato returns. I don't know if the village would survive." As the two eager boys escorted him through the portal and into Diagon Alley, Minato let out a sigh. They would be picking up the boys' first year supplies today. Harry received his letter early this morning, and he had just turned 11, today, actually. Minato was enrolling Naruto early so that his boys could be together, but Naruto would receive his letter on October 10th. In order to prevent him from losing them, Minato had placed charms on both of them. Over the years, he had had enough of that. Rolling his eyes, he trailed behind his giddy boys. "Dad. Look," Harry said, gesturing toward the ice cream shop. Minato grinned, "Can we get ice cream?" "After lunch, we'll get ice cream. First, we have to go to Gringotts." The boys nodded and sighed, then followed their dad. The three of them saw a small commotion in an alley down the street as they entered the white marble bank. Ignoring it, they went on into the bank. Minato went to the closest open teller inside the bank and asked to enter his and Harry's vaults. Minato shook his head. "Key?" The teller sighed and instructed them to follow Harry to a supervisor, saying, "Harry doesn't have a key. I never received one even though I am his legal guardian." With his two boys in tow, Minato followed, mentally moaning at how difficult his day was becoming. A luxurious office with gilded furnishings was shown to them. Naruto and Harry wrinkled their noses in disgust, as Minato observed. He muttered, "Be courteous. They're the hosts." He turned back to the front after receiving a nod of confirmation from both of his boys. The teller soon reappeared and guided them down a dimly lit corridor that appeared to gradually lose its ornate adornment. As they went, Minato kept a close eye on Harry because he had trouble in enclosed, dark areas. Harry did all right, though, and they were soon shown into another office that was completely made of rock and had no decorations. Another goblin was waiting already. Minato bowed and his boys imitated him, saying, "Master Rufong, head of the Potter accounts." The goblin snorted, Thank you for seeing us today. We seem to have run into a problem. Minato nodded as the goblin started outlining what Harry would have to do to prove his identity. I was informed. We will need to do a blood test to confirm that he is indeed Mr. Potter. The materials we require will be in here shortly. In fact, it seems to have been standard procedure. They quickly started working after the materials arrived. Harry eyed the dagger warily and asked, "So all I have to do is cut my palm? And place it on the talisman?" "Yes. If you are who you say you are, the cut should heal." No one inquired as to what would occur if the individual was not who they claimed to be. It was undoubtedly a very bad destiny. After giving a nod, Harry swiftly cut his palm slightly with the dagger. The talisman glowed from the blood, proving Harry's identity. As soon as Harry drew his hand back, Minato looked at it. "You are indeed Harry Potter. I will have your new key in a moment. Would you like for all old keys to be recovered?" Minato gave a nod. The goblin wrote something on a piece of paper and sent it down a slot, and I would like to know if it is possible to deny everyone but S3 access to Harry's vaults. Soon after, another goblin unlocked the door and brought in a ledger and a small wooden box. The master goblin had opened the box and handed Harry a small bronze key, which he promptly gave to his father. "Your key, Mr. Potter." This book was much heavier and larger than the previous one. "This is an accounting book, Mr. Namikaze. You can keep track of spending, income, who has access, and many other things with this. This one is for your own account," he said, passing a smaller book over the desk. "And this one is for Mr. Potter's accounts." The elder goblin nodded and summoned another to lead them to their vaults, saying, "Thank you, Master Rufong." After an exhilarating cart ride, Minato and the boys emerged from the bank into the now blinking sun. "Let's get ice cream, boys," they both exclaimed. Naruto shouted, "Race you dad," and the two boys started running at a regular, non-ninja pace. Minato's longer legs allowed him to easily catch up to them, and he followed them into the ice cream parlor at Fortescue. Minato let each of them have a cone or a sundae. After selecting cones, they both started attempting to choose their preferred ice cream flavor. Minato simply placed an order for a plain vanilla cone. When they had made up their minds, Minato took them outside to a table where they sat to eat their ice cream. Harry's cone was smaller than Naruto's, so he finished first. Minato took out one of their supply lists and asked, "Where are we going next, Dad?" "I think we will go to the clothing store next, as you both need to be fitted for robes and such. Better to get the unpleasant stuff out of the way first. Then we will just start at that end of the alley and work our way up." Harry smiled. After Naruto finished his ice cream, he said, "Okay Dad, let's go," and they got up to go shopping. Since they could easily obtain undergarments in the non-magical world, Minato forced the boys to buy their robes at Madame Malkin's, along with a number of cloaks of varying thickness, a set of formal robes, and a few sets of ordinary outer robes. When that portion of the trip was over, everyone was relieved. After that, they visited an optician to have everyone's eyes examined. Flourish and Blots, where they had to drag Harry out. The apothecary, where Naruto detested the place due to its foul odor. Elop's Owl Emporium, where Naruto drove all the animals insane except for one owl, which they purchased, and a number of other stores for the remaining supplies. By the end of the journey, they were all worn out. Something close to Gringotts exploded just as the three were ready to enter the portal leading to the leaky cauldron. Just as two kunai flew where they had been moments before, Minato swiftly grabbed the two boys and apparated them away. The three of them reappeared in the foyer of their London townhouse, Minato's feet slamming into the floor. Struggling for his balance, he lost his footing and let go of his sons. "Dad?" Naruto asked, holding Minato's arm to help him maintain his equilibrium. Minato gave his sons a feeble smile and said, "Sorry, I did that badly." Minato rolled his eyes at Harry and said, "Dad, we don't buy that for a minute. Why are you panicking?" "I'm not panicking." Naruto cut Minato off. Minato sighed, "Yes you are, Dad. We aren't stupid." Sometimes he didn't like how perceptive the boys were. Harry broke the oppressive silence that had descended upon the group by asking, "Why are you panicking?" Both boys nodded in agreement as the mother said, "I will tell you, but first you need to promise me that you can try to stay calm." Minato was met with wide eyes and said, "There were shinobi in that alley." "What?" Harry repeated his brother's incredulous expression. Naruto gave Harry a perplexed look and said, "Yes. I apparated us badly because I needed to get us out of there quickly. Actually, I didn't even apparate us." "Dad?" Minato asked, glancing at the child with black hair and nearly smiling at Harry's utterly blank expression. "Yes, Harry?" Harry inhaled deeply and made an effort to synchronize his thoughts. Minato blinked and asked, if you didn't apparate us, what did you get us here with? Naruto nodded and said, I said that out loud, didn't I? Oops. Well, since I already let that cat out of the bag, I brought us home using a jutsu that I developed a long time ago. It was designed to carry me long distances. I panicked and didn't think before activating my jutsu. Naruto immediately concurred with his brother, saying, that's why it felt different. Dad? Harry asked, observing his father's face. Yes, Harry? Minato blinked and said, I still love you. Harry grinned and Naruto appeared perplexed as he said, I wasn't worried about you both not loving me anymore. I was more worried about whether I hurt you. Minato looked at the clock and rubbed his eyes, asking, why would you hurt us? Maybe we should go to the kitchen and eat dinner? The boys asked, blinking and checking the time. They must have gone shopping all day. With a shrug, the two made their way to the kitchen. Minato was in charge of cooking now. Minato didn't get a chance to store the things they had purchased for several hours. It didn't matter that the boys' school supplies made up the majority of it. Harry's trunk lid had just been closed when Minato heard a piercing knock on the door. He moved cautiously from the den into the foyer and down the hall. Minato cautiously cracked open the door. A man with a few bundles on his back and long, spiky white hair stood on his front step. Minato blinked in surprise. Sensei? Kai. It was undoubtedly his old sensei who said, Minato. Seriously? Why would I be a genjutsu? Jiraiya rolled his eyes and trailed Minato back into the kitchen, saying, close run in today. Come in, please. Jiraiya said, looking perplexed, we've got to stay quiet, my boys are sleeping. Minato sighed and told him about Harry. I know you have Naruto, but who else do you have? She asked. Minato buried his head in his hands and asked, so you have two somewhat abused children? Are you cursed or something? Lately I've been wondering that as well. Both of them are like me. They both have chakra and magic. They also both attract bad luck. I took them shopping for school supplies today and we end up being in the place when it gets attacked. I take them to the zoo, one of them gets attacked by a snake. I can't even train them to fight off the bad guys as well as I want to now because they will be in school for 9 months. Minato sighed and curled up in his arms as Jiraiya chuckled. Minato raised his head slightly and protruded his tongue at his sensei, saying, I am so glad I'm not you. Minato scowled at Jiraiya and said, so, you were training them? Jiraiya grinned and said, they're bad luck charms. What do you think? Minato inhaled deeply and said, I was asking because I want to know if you want them to become fully fledged ninja. Yes. I am going to see if they can take their Chunin exams in a few years. Maybe at 12. Jiraiya nodded. Minato gave him a startled look and said, that's great. There is talk of the summer exams being back in Konoha that year. Jiraiya shook his head, saying, what? I thought they would be in Kiri or something. Kiri is currently involved in a civil war. It doesn't show any signs of abating for at least a few years. Minato exhaled. Jiraiya patted him on the shoulder and said, of course it doesn't. Why is my luck so shoddy? Minato nodded, satisfied with the response. Maybe you irritated someone in a previous life. Jiraiya smiled and asked, so do you need a place to crash? Follow me. Minato guided him to the guest bedroom, which Harry and Naruto had agreed to share, and left him to settle in. Good night, minimum. Rolling over, Naruto fell from the bed. Ow! He exclaimed, sitting up and massaging his forehead. Harry stuck his untidy head over the edge of his bed's top bunk and asked, are you okay, Naru? Harry smiled and said, I'm fine, fell out of bed. Naruto jumped to his feet and gasped at the word train. I was getting up anyways, it's already 9 o'clock. Come on lazybones, you're going to make us late for the train. Then he was a blur, grabbing an outfit from the closet and going to the bathroom to change. I forgot, he exclaimed. After taking a 5-minute shower, Naruto started dragging his fully loaded trunk down the stairs. Their father was preparing breakfast when Harry came downstairs. Everyone laughed as Naruto's stomach growled, morning sleepyhead, hungry? Naruto sat down at the table and said, leave your trunk by the door, I'll take it to the car in a moment. Itadakimasu. The two exclaimed as Minato grinned and started carrying the trunks to the vehicle. Harry exclaimed, wow, upon seeing the massive scarlet steam engine. Minato ruffled Harry's hair and placed his hand on his head, saying, amazing isn't it? Dad! Harry exclaimed, removing the hand and giving his dad a hug. As their father pushed the trolley with the 2 trunks on it, Naruto pulled Harry farther down the train, saying, love you, Dad. I'll miss you. With a smile, Minato said, here's an empty one, and began loading the trunks onto the train via the door nearest their compartment. He gave them both a hug before hoisting them onto the train. "Remember, I expect you to behave," he said, looking at Naruto, "and I want you both to try your hardest. Remember, Hedwig will carry any of your letters. If you want to contact me, I will be in Konoha in October and November." Before putting their trunks in the compartment of their choice, the boys gave him a collective hug and whispered their goodbyes, saying, "I love you." Naruto gestured to Minato as he opened the window. Minato grinned and said, "You'll send us anything we forget, right?" Naruto grinned and waved once more before raising the window once more. "Of course, Naruto. Hedwig will be there by the end of the week with anything you forgot." Soon after, the clock struck 11, and the train started to move. At last, the brothers were en route to Hogwarts. Harry sighed as he sank back into the luxurious red cushions. The buoys had just loaded up on candy after the trolley passed by. Naruto looked up from the back of his new wizard card and said, "Hey Naruto?" Naruto grinned at his elder brother and said, "Yeah Harry?" Despite Harry's smaller stature, Naruto liked to remind him that he was only a few months older than him. Naruto grabbed another chocolate frog and opened it, catching it before it could get away. "What do you think Hogwarts will be like?" he asked. "I don't know, Harry. Dad said we would be fine though, and I believe him. Then again, he also said something about houses," Harry murmured. "If we're in different houses, do you think we can still be brothers?" Naruto grinned. "Of course we'll still be brothers. Tell you what, if we get split up for some reason, we should arrange to meet somewhere easy to find, okay?" Harry grinned. "Thanks, Naru." The two brothers were startled by a knock and glanced up in time to witness the door of their compartment being pushed open. "I'm looking for a Harry Potter." A child with blonde hair that was nearly white and two boys who appeared to be bodyguards were at the door. As they both got to their feet, Naruto grinned at Harry. Naruto is nearly touching the back of Harry's shoulder as he approaches the front. The blonde boy blushed and said, "I'm Harry Potter, but probably not the one you're looking for as I don't know you." "I am Draco Malfoy. Heir to," he began, but Naruto interrupted. "The ancient and noble house of Malfoy." Harry gave a nearly savage laugh. Naruto grinned and said, "Seriously? You come into our compartment and try to bully us?" Harry was going to dissect this child using only reason. Bullies were something he detested. Malfoy had turned pale as Harry gave him a new one. "I am heir to the most ancient and most noble house of Potter. My brother, whom you conveniently ignored, is the son of Minato Namikaze and stands to inherit a vast fortune. He had likely just lost his father's protection and any chance of ruling Slytherin if he ever found out about the altercation, as he publicly insulted the heir to a larger house and a huge fortune." As Malfoy quickly retreated from their compartment in an attempt to put as much space between himself and Harry as possible without actually leaving, Naruto chuckled. Harry then closed the compartment door in Malfoy's face and said, "I'm not going to mention this to our father, but in the future, remember your place, Malfoy." "That was great, Harry." Harry grinned at his brother, attempting to hide his feeling of nervousness. Harry smiled. "Who knew that Dad's diplomacy lessons could come in handy so quickly?" Naruto asked, laughing. He then threw a chocolate frog at his brother, starting a food war that lasted for more than an hour and cost them both a few boxes of flavor beans when they broke open from the force of the throw. As he and Naruto got off the train, Harry stretched and moaned. It was far too long to spend 7 hours in one room. The ride felt longer because not many people had come to see Harry and Naruto after the incident because word of what had happened to Malfoy had spread quickly. Naruto gestured toward a swinging lantern and said, Fur's years over here, Harry," and he then navigated the throng of students to reach it. A tall man and a crowd of children their own age welcomed them. From what they could see, the man led the group down a narrow gully to a small fleet of boats on the edge of a large lake. "Right, that all ya? Anyway, follow ma lead, watch step now," he said. The man reached out and tapped the side of his boat as soon as everyone was comfortable. "For-ta a boat, come on now," he exclaimed. Forward. The boats began to move with a powerful lurch, and soon they were sailing across the lake's dark waters. Everyone climbed out of the boats and onto a rocky section of shore beneath a bridge after a brief ride. The man knocked on the door with a powerful hand. The stern-looking woman who had opened the door nodded and said, "Fur's years, Professor." The stern woman led the small group through the door and into a small chamber, where she left them to wait. "Thank you, Hagrid. I can take them from here." A buzz began as soon as she stepped out of the room. The noise was largely ignored by Harry and Naruto, who instead focused on exploring their new environment. They saw Malfoy deliberately avoiding them, a nervous-looking boy with his cloak tied incorrectly, and a bushy-haired girl babbling on about how she had read this or that. Overall, neither of them was impressed. However, The strict professor soon returned and assembled them into a group. Welcome to Hogwarts. I am Professor McGonagall. Here at Hogwarts, you will be separated into houses that you will live in for all 7 years of your time here. Your house will be your family while you are here. Any rule breaking will cost you points, while good behavior can gain you points. Now, form a line behind me. Harry stabbed his brother in the back after falling into the line behind Naruto. Glancing back, Naruto smiled to reassure his brother. In big crowds, Harry was still quite anxious. The line of first-year students was led by the now renamed Professor McGonagall into a spacious hall where several hundred students were divided into 4 tables. She guided the group up to the elevated dais at the front of the room and down the aisle between the 2 middle tables. Stopping the line, McGonagall sat on a 3-legged stool on the other side of an old, tattered hat. Harry glanced around the room, saw that nearly every student was staring at the hat with obvious curiosity, and decided to keep an eye on it himself. Harry saw the hat sing as a tear near the brim burst open. Harry became more anxious with each verse of the rather long song. He didn't experience any of the sensations the hat described, and based on his brother's expression, he wasn't alone. There was a lot of applause before Professor McGonagall produced a rather large scroll and unfolded it. When I call your name, you will step forward and put on the hat. After you are sorted, you will make your way to your appropriate house. Abbott, Hannah. As he waited to be called, Harry ignored the next dozen or so names. Harry turned to face his brother and pushed him out of line, saying, Namikaze, Naruto. A wave of whispers swept through the hall as Naruto sat on the stool for a considerable amount of time before the hat spoke to McGonagall, which was apparently very unusual. McGonagall stared at the hat in confusion and said, I will need his brother. They need to be sorted at the same time to determine their placement. With a sigh, the hat turned to face the first years. There were many gasps and more whispers when Harry Potter said, Harry Potter. I will need you to come here please. As Naruto raised the hat to allow the two to sit back. Back on the stool, Harry staggered anxiously in the direction of it. They listened for a while as the hat talked about things they had never heard of and examined them, something Naruto found extremely awkward. The twins of prophecy were unknown to both of them. You are both very talented. You both are very intelligent as well. I see where I should place you very well. Ravenclaw. They stood together, removing their hats. With a sigh, McGonagall gestured them to a Ravenclaw table that was extremely silent. Sitting between the other first-year claws, they both looked expectantly at the front. McGonagall cleared her throat and continued sorting despite the persistent murmurs. Hi. I'm Terry. Terry Boot. Naruto returned the handshake and gave his introduction. I know, Harry Potter is one of the most recognizable names in the wizarding world. Harry grumbled. It had only been a few months since he had learned that he didn't like the idea of being famous at all. Naruto was now frowning as well, saying, Namikaze is just as famous. I mean, one of the richest people in the world coming to Hogwarts? Terry said, please, just don't. We didn't actually do anything, as she looked down. While Harry silently inspected the other pupils at the table, Naruto tried to reassure the man with a smile, saying, sorry, I got excited. Terry nodded and said, just, don't do it again, okay? After giving his brother a quick glance, Harry began to pile his plate high. Naruto asked Harry, who shrugged, so why did the hat sort you like he did? Terry glanced at them and said, dunno, it didn't tell us. Terry raised his hands defensively and said, we're not lying. I didn't say you were. Harry scowled and placed a warning hand on Naruto's shoulder to help him relax. Terry nodded, and the group fell silent awkwardly. I know, I'm sorry. It's been a stressful day. The headmaster led them in the school song as they stood with everyone else after finishing their meal in silence. Harry did not participate in the song and remained silent for the most part. After that, a prefect led the first-years upstairs to the Ravenclaw Tower, where they were given an explanation of the entrance. She knocked on the brass knocker on the wall and said, therefore, each time you enter the tower, you must answer a riddle. If you are unable to answer the riddle, you must wait for someone who can. Harry touched Naruto's shoulder and said, what falls but never breaks and breaks but never falls? Naruto nodded. He had also figured it out. Naruto raised his voice from the rear of the group and said, now, the riddles vary in difficulty. This one is a fairly difficult one. Can anyone answer it? The door knocker nodded and the door creaked open, saying, the answer is night and day. The prefect showed them the dorm entrances after guiding them around the common area and saying, good job. When everyone nodded, she went on, remember, boys cannot enter the girls' dorms. Girls should not enter the boys' dorms. She vanished up the stairs to the female dorms, saying, I want all of you first years back in the common room at 6 in the morning. We will have a house meeting with Professor Flitwick before heading to breakfast. Harry and Naruto were among the first people to ascend the dorm's stairs, and they were relieved to find their beds adjacent to one another. After giving Naruto a silent tap on the shoulder, Harry vanished behind the curtains of his bed. Good night to you too, Harry. As soon as their heads touched their pillows, they fell asleep. In the first-year dorms, Naruto and Harry both arose before the other 4 boys. By 5:30, they were both completely dressed, showered, and waiting for Professor Flitwick and the other Ravenclaws in the common areas. Naruto was reading a book about transformation, while Harry was reading a book about wizarding etiquette. Because they had descended much earlier than their classmates, both attracted disbelieving looks as the remainder of the tower gradually trickled down into the common area. However, the majority of the looks were caused by what they were reading. Harry and Naruto were among the first-year students who were astounded when Professor Flitwick entered the tower through a wall at precisely 9 o'clock. Why? To give the professor access, the wall slid out of position. The small professor stood on a small podium in the center of the room and said, "Welcome." The prefects nodded, and he went on in his somewhat squeaky voice, "Prefects, is everyone here? Good, good. First, I would like to formally welcome our new first years. You are now Ravenclaws. Later this afternoon, I will be handing out special assignments sheets to you all that will also contain the rules of this noble house. We have a very strong and high reputation. I expect you all to help contribute to the wonderful history of this house while you are here at Hogwarts." He took a sip of water and looked at his sibling. The professor had already caused Naruto to lose consciousness. Harry could swear that the small professor glanced directly at him several times during his speech. "I will hand out your schedules in a moment. I expect you all to do well in your classes. If you have a problem, my door is always open. I hope you will have a great time here at Hogwarts. Now, off to breakfast with all of you." When his brother nearly fell out of his seat, he smiled and gave Naruto a shove. Harry grabbed Naruto's new schedule, got him up, and they started to leave. The first house to eat breakfast was Ravenclaw House. The senior years clarified that this was typical and that they typically ate breakfast first. Naruto and Harry had always risen early, so they were not at all bothered by this. They both sat down close to the high table at the end of the table. Harry was seated at the end of the bench, while Terry Boot, the boy they had met the previous evening, sat beside Naruto. Terry blinked a little owlishly and asked, "How early did you two get up?" Harry grinned subtly as Naruto responded, "A prefect had to wake me and the other guys up. He told us that you two had been downstairs for at least an hour already." Harry nodded and said, "I think the clock said 4:15. Terry's eyes widened at the mention of the time. "We showered and stuff and were downstairs by 5. We're used to getting up super early though." Naruto simply smiled back and put a piece of bacon in his mouth. "Geez, and I thought that 8 was early," he exclaimed. Terry took the hint and started eating as well. "What classes do we have first, Harry?" Harry checked his schedule to make sure he was right before responding. Harry glanced at the schedule once more. "Charms at 10:15. Then lunch at noon. After lunch we have herbology with Hufflepuff and a free period." Naruto chuckled as he checked his watch and said, "Today seems fairly easy, not bad for a Monday." Harry grinned and put his schedule back in his bag. "We have about half an hour before charms. We should leave about 15 minutes early so that we aren't late because with our sense of directions, we're bound to be late." Good point. They both took their seats, ate the remainder of their breakfast in relative quiet, and kept a close eye on the rest of the school as they started to enter the Great Hall at around 9:30. The boys got up at precisely 10 o'clock, checked their bags, and then left the hall and ascended the grand staircase. Harry scowled and tried to recall, "Charms is on the 4th floor, right?" Naruto grinned and gestured to the little plaque on the wall beside him, asking, "Yeah, why? 4th floor," it said. Naruto concurred, and the two of them went down that hallway. "That's really handy." Another door with a label appeared about halfway down the hallway. "Charms" is what this one read. Harry scowled, but they went in anyhow. That was quick. Normally it takes us a lot longer to find our way around an unfamiliar place. Their head of house was seated at the desk in the front of the well-lit room. As their professor nearly fell out of his chair, Naruto choked back a laugh and said, "Hello, Professor." "Oh, hello boys. Come in, come in. Wasn't expecting anyone for another 10 minutes. They exclaimed as they took out their books and wands and claimed a desk at the front of the room. The professor nodded sympathetically. "We weren't expecting to get here so soon either. Normally it takes us a really long time to get somewhere new." The two grinned as he said, "I still remember my days in Hogwarts so long ago. I got lost a lot in the first few months." If they got lost, At least they would become too agitated. They would probably not be the only ones. As class time approached, students gradually started to enter the classroom. When it was time, Professor Flitwick waved his wand to close the door and began taking roll. The Slytherins and Ravenclaws took this class together. They started practicing the levitation charm as soon as the lesson started. As students attempted to make their feather float, a variety of voices could be heard throughout the room. Harry was closely watching his brother while Naruto took the lead in their pair. After observing what Naruto was doing incorrectly and having him repeat the spell, he attempted it himself. Wingardium Leviosa. His feather trembled, but it remained in place. Naruto closely observed Harry as he scowled. Harry gave a nod, and Naruto lifted his wand, saying, "I'll try again, Harry." Wingardium Leviosa. Naruto's feather rose a few inches off the desk before descending again. Harry grinned and gave a gentle clap. Harry raised his wand and repeated the spell, saying, "Your turn again, Harry." He lifted his feather. Harry added more magic to it, and before long, his feather was hovering at a height of roughly 3 feet. "Oh, Mr. Potter has done it." Everyone in the class, with the exception of Naruto, paused and gaped. All he did was raise his wand and attempt to raise his feather once more. Slowly, his feather rose a few inches, and then it soared upwards like a cork being thrown from a wine bottle. Before his magic stabilized the input and caused him to hover as well, it bounced up and down. After giving his brother a back pat with his free hand, Harry and his brother started chasing each other's feather across the room. Even the professor was taken aback by this, and the majority of the class gaped. When they realized that everyone in the class was staring at them, both brothers simultaneously lost focus and turned red. If they continued to do well in every class, it was going to be a long day. It was a very slow first week of classes. Tuesday's events included Hufflepuff's potions and the Slytherin's transfiguration. Wednesday's events included charms once more, Gryffindor's history of magic, and astronomy for all classes that evening. Friday was herbology and defense against the dark arts, Dada, with the Gryffindors, and Thursday was more potions and transfiguration. Potions was the only class they struggled with. Snape, the professor, had been resentful and impolite to all of the students, but particularly to Harry and Naruto. It was also a slow weekend. On Saturday, they learned how to play wizard's chess, finished all of their homework, slept a little later, and wrote a letter to their father. They talked about their classes and relaxed on the grounds on Sunday. It was incredibly dull. However, after that week, the remainder of the year started to go by very fast. Before they knew it, Halloween had arrived. For a long time, Halloween had been a very gloomy day. It brought back memories of Harry's parents' deaths and Naruto's father's Halloween depression. They didn't want to celebrate the holiday. Regretfully, they were powerless to alter the feast that evening. Attendance was required. Both boys reluctantly made their way down and winced at the Great Hall's decorations. They sighed as they took their now usual seats close to the head table. Terry Boot, their acquaintance and friend, took his usual seat beside them. Harry winced, and Naruto grimaced at his plate. "What's got you two so down today? You should be celebrating, it's Halloween," Harry said. Naruto turned to the man and calmly and quietly explained to Terry why they both detested Halloween, asking, "Seriously, what's wrong?" Terry was nearly as pale as the Hogwarts ghosts after he finished. Harry chuckled ominously, "Blimey. I'm sorry guys, I never stopped to think about that, blimey." Naruto chuckled briefly before the three of them fell into an uncomfortable silence. "No one ever does see it from our side, do they?" he asked. Harry and Naruto didn't eat much when the food arrived. A few hours into the feast, the Great Hall's doors flew open, and their defense against the dark arts professor, Professor Quirrell, rushed in, shouting something about trolls. The hall had exploded into panic the moment they processed, so Professor Dumbledore used his wand to control it with a few bangs. The teachers went out a side door, and the hall fell into disorder once more. "Prefects, escort your houses back to your common rooms. Teachers, follow me please." Harry saw their 7th year female prefect and grabbed Naruto to keep them from getting separated in the crowd. "First-year Ravenclaws. To me please," he exclaimed. They all went to their dorms to continue the feast in relative safety after following their prefects back to the common room. Instead, Harry and Naruto decided to go to bed. When the prefects stopped by to see how the students were doing, they were both soundly asleep. It wasn't until the following morning that they both realized what had happened. Harry couldn't believe a word Terry was saying. "So you're saying that the troll actually killed someone?" Harry asked. Terry nodded and carried on the rumors. "A first-year Grit. She was crying in the bathroom because of something that Weasley kid said to her. Apparently the troll completely destroyed the bathroom before the teachers got there. She was dead when they found her. Naruto looked at his companion. Harry pointed to the staff table and said, "No wonder the teachers look so upset. Every instructor, including Dumbledore, was dressed in black." Dumbledore stood up as Harry said that, and the hall became quiet. "Dear students, it is my deepest regret to inform you of the death of one of your classmates. First year, Hermione Granger was killed last night when the troll caked her in a girl's bathroom. We ask that you respect her and do not spread derogatory remarks about her." Harry looked at his brother and both of them sighed. Many of the students raised their goblets and drank to the memory of a girl that most of them had never met. A toast to Ms. Granger, for her intelligence and her bravery, may she rest in peace. The students were promptly dismissed to their classes following the toast. Harry raised his eyebrows and asked, "You know you're first in the class now, Harry?" Naruto shrugged and asked, "What brought this up, Naru?" "Just thinking. Granger was beating you in our year but not by much," Harry laughed. The boys were in herbology and conversing while repotting seedlings of a plant that neither of them knew the name of. "I could care less about class standings." Naruto raised his filthy hands defensively, saying, "I was just saying." Harry turned back to his plants after shaking his head, but his thoughts were racing. Granger didn't have many pals. Because of her attitude and her insistence that everyone follow the rules exactly as she did, she was essentially shunned. When she learned that Harry had performed the matchstick to needle transfiguration on his first attempt, she became extremely irate. Fortunately, their time with the Gryffindors had been brief. To be honest, she had been really obnoxious. However, Harry couldn't help but feel bad for her parents. After less than 2 months of education, their daughter returned home in a body bag from a school they had no knowledge of. If one of them passed away, he couldn't imagine how their father would feel. Harry was also unsure of their plans regarding Weasley. She had been in the bathroom at the time because of him. He pondered whether Weasley would receive punishment but brushed it off. It wasn't his business, really. Harry was startled out of his reverie by a commotion and looked up to see that her planter had been knocked over by an auburn-haired Hufflepuff. She was now covered in dirt, and he suppressed a laugh at her unhappy expression. But when Harry's brother started laughing, Naruto lost control and elbowed him. The offended Hufflepuff gave him a glare and then attempted to clean her robes of the dirt. Harry's glare gave Naruto the hint, and he quickly stopped talking. The remaining 10 minutes of the class period went by quite swiftly. Before long, it was December and Halloween had been forgotten by the school. There was a sense of Christmas. Terry was seated next to the two in a cramped pair of armchairs by the fireplace and asked, "What are you two doing for the halls?" They were all working on their homework while holding books in their hands. Without raising his eyes from his essay on potions, Harry grunted. Taking that as a cue, Naruto responded to Terry. Harry nodded absently while blowing on the ink to dry it. "We're spending it with Dad. Apparently we have some family stuff to deal with." "Finally finished," he exclaimed with a dramatic sigh as he leaned back. Harry had blown up a cauldron to earn the 17-inch essay that Snape had given him about the perils of being careless in a potion lab. Naruto looked at the essay. Harry's handwriting was neat and quite small. Harry chuckled and said, "Niece, think you'll get a good grade?" Naruto gave a strange half-nod shrug and said, "I'm just happy I didn't get detention." The conversation then shifted back to the holiday plans. Naruto chuckled at Terry's predicament, saying, "I have a lot of family things to do. I will probably be bored out of my mind." Harry shrugged and said, "Hey, Harry, reckon we'll go to Konoha?" Terry just stared in confusion as Naruto grimaced and said, "Not likely. I think Uncle Jiraiya will come up here. I hate the cold." They all returned to their studies after Harry's laugh. With a sigh, Naruto reclined in his chair. They were on their way home for Christmas, and he was seated across from Harry. Harry heard his brother raise an eyebrow and sigh, and he looked up. Harry turned back to his book and made a noise to indicate that he agreed, saying, "Just tired." They were full of energy and had been up since 6 because they had to pack. Terry had gotten up at the same time and was somewhere on the train. "Harry?" Naruto suddenly had a very anxious expression. Naruto swallowed. "Yeah?" Harry raised his head sharply and asked, "Do you think Dad still loves us?" Harry couldn't understand this line of thought at all. What brought this question up, Naru? He asked. No matter what, their father had promised to always love them. Naruto was aware of that. Was Naruto crying when he said, just thinking? Harry quickly got to his feet and walked over to where his brother was. "Don't be silly, Naru. Of course he loves us still. Just because we've been at school doesn't mean he won't love us anymore. If anything, I imagine he will be almost smothering us this next few weeks." Naruto hugged him with a watery grin. Harry screamed, Let me go. but made little effort to get away. Naruto let him go, saying, "Thanks, Harry." Naruto chuckled and nudged Harry, saying, "Yeah, yeah. Can't have you getting all mopey, can I? You're supposed to be the cheerful one." Returning to his chair, Harry leafed through his book in an attempt to locate his page. He eventually gave up, and Naruto enticed him to play the wizarding game they both adored, Exploding Snap. Until they arrived at the station, they continued to play. "Dad." Naruto jumped from the train and embraced his father as Harry removed his trunk from the rack and got off the aircraft. He sighed as Minato ruffled his son's hair and said, "Hello, Naruto." Minato grinned and said, "I missed you, Dad." Naruto gasped and hurried back onto the train, saying, "I missed you too, Naruto. You need to get your trunk though." As his father shrank it and placed it in his pocket, Harry chuckled and drew his trunk closer. "I missed you too, Dad. You wouldn't believe the term we had." The boys both agreed not to send Minato a lot of information about their year because he had spent October and November in Konoha. Hedwig was unable to fly halfway across the globe. Minato shrank Naruto's panting trunk and placed it in the same pocket as Harry's trunk, saying, "We will catch up later." "Hello again, Naruto." Minato grinned as the boys applauded. "Do you guys want to go out for dinner?" He had missed their joy. "Where to, boys?" they asked, glancing at one another before sharing the name of their favorite eatery. Minato led the boys through the barrier and into the more crowded area of the station, just like in the Muggle world. As the boys made their way through the station and out into the streets of London, he held them tightly to prevent them from getting lost. Minato took the boys back to their townhouse after a very tasty dinner. Although both boys were exhausted, they were still too energetic to sleep. As they pleaded with him for tales, Minato grinned. He almost instantly regretted asking, all right, what stories do you want to hear?" Minato raised his eyebrows and asked, "Can we hear the story of our first Christmas, Dad?" Harry nodded, but they persisted in wanting to hear the story. "Why do you want to hear that? You were there, don't you remember?" With a sigh, Minato started. "It was less than 3 months after we got you, Harry." A flashback watching his black-haired child do the dishes, Minato let out a sigh. Both Naruto and Harry still felt that they owed him something after spending 3 months with his family. Naruto and Minato were seated at the table. When Minato received no response to his question, "Harry, Naruto, what do you guys want for Christmas?" He checked his paperwork. The two boys were looking at him in utter bewilderment. Harry was the first to speak. Minato nearly flinched at their disbelieving looks. "You mean, we actually get presents?" she asked. Naruto's eyes widened as he said, "Yes, you will always get presents on Christmas and your birthdays." The boys nearly stopped breathing when Minato grinned and asked, "Why, you really mean it?" The two gave Minato a quick hug before heading to their room. "Yes, so come here and give me a hug. Then I want you to get upstairs and write me a list of anything you want. Yes, Harry, even you. I know how to do dishes." After shaking his head, Minato got up to do the dishes. He would quickly break Harry's habit. "And a few days later you guys gave me your lists. There wasn't many toys on there, so I splurged and got you a whole bunch of stuff. I know, Harry, you in particular loved the Lego toy set I got you. I did get you to stop doing the dishes after a while though." Minato turned to the boys. They were both sleeping soundly, leaning against one another. Levitating the two of them to their room, Minato laughed. "Good night, boys." Minato took the two Christmas shoppers to Diagon Alley the following day. Despite the overcrowding, they managed to survive. Harry and Naruto both purchased small gifts for their roommates. They knew the boys wouldn't mind that it was mostly candy. Shopping for their father's gift took them the longest. Although Minato enjoyed reading, he was constantly taking notes for his studies. Naruto's present was determined by that. To be more sentimental, Harry bought his dad a picture frame and a photo album that contained all of the photos he had taken of them as they grew up. To keep those gifts a surprise, they carefully concealed them while shopping. Minato took them into the Muggle world after Diagon Alley, where they made numerous toy purchases. These would be donated to an orphanage, where Minato would visit and deliver the gifts. He would take the boys along, and they would make a big deal out of it. Harry had noticed that he was receiving many gifts while other children were likely receiving none, so this became one of their new customs. Minato had done a lot of research because he had felt guilty. The following year, they began distributing the gifts. Seeing the children's smiles made Minato think it was all worthwhile. With a groan, Naruto said, "Naruto, get up, it's Christmas," as a large weight fell onto his bed. "It's too early," he exclaimed, rolling over and covering his head with his blanket. Sadly, Harry had other ideas, and the blanket was torn away, leaving him vulnerable to their bedroom's ruthless cold air. "All right already. Naruto sat up and rolled back over. Good. I'm going to wake up Dad now. Naruto scowled at his younger sibling. But he knew that if he fell back asleep, Harry would decide to douse him with water. Naruto didn't want to do that again because he had already done it once. With a sigh, he got to his feet and carefully stretched. Then, yawning, Naruto went downstairs, where his hyperactive brother and father welcomed him. Harry seemed to be bouncing off the walls. Minato grinned at his younger son and said, "We can open presents soon, right?" Harry sighed but scrambled back up and started to prepare a bowl of cereal for himself, saying, "Yes, Harry, but you know the rules, breakfast first." As Harry hurried to retrieve his gifts, breakfast was completed in record time. Harry cheered and hurried to the living room before anyone else could say, "All right, Harry. Since you are so excited, you get to hand out presents." Harry had already arranged all of the gifts when Minato and Naruto arrived in the living room, and each of them had their own pile by their usual seats. Harry opened his first gift after Minato motioned for him to go first. "Terry sent it." Harry gasped at the exquisite book bag that was inside after carefully removing the royal blue wrapping paper. His name was embroidered in bronze on the flap of this deep navy blue item. Terry's favorite candy was chocolate frogs. Wow. Remind me to buy Terry another box of chocolate frogs. Next, Naruto opened a nearly identical book bag that Terry had given him. The name was the only distinction. Minato opened a gift from Jiraiya, which he had received after Naruto. It was a sealing kit for masters. With a startled whistle, Minato decided not to give Jiraiya a thank you. Somehow he knew Minato had run out of supplies for sealing. They unwrapped all of their gifts in roughly 2 hours. Jiraiya gave Naruto and Harry some useful gifts. Their father gave them some toys, and their roommates gave them a ton of candy. Minato received a letter, 3 books on different subjects from Sarutobi, a fancy stationery set from Naruto, and a full photo album from Harry. The letter informed Minato that the Dursleys had perished in a prison breakout a few weeks prior and cautioned him to keep an eye out for his sons. A traitor had tried to take the Forbidden Scroll, which was a significant theft from the village. Minato rubbed his face and sighed. Life was simply ideal. Later that afternoon, Minato and the boys went to the orphanage of their choice with a large bag full of gifts. Minato would be portraying Santa Claus, and the gifts were coded according to age and gender. His assistants, Harry and Naruto, would work with the matron to organize the kids. The older children knew exactly what to do because they did this every year. After organizing the children for 10 minutes or so, Minato came in. While Naruto led the next child up, Harry would pass Minato the appropriate gift. Everyone was satisfied and worn out at the end of the day. Following the gifts, Harry and Naruto played and chatted with a few of the kids, and they were all ecstatic that someone was interested enough to give them some time. When they eventually arrived home later that evening and Minato was putting them to bed, he heard his son whisper something to his enormous stuffed bear that nearly broke his heart. "I'm really lucky, I guess. Those kids were so happy to get one present. I am too, but I also realize that I have a home. They don't know how long they will be in the orphanage or if they will ever get out." Despite being shocked, he chose not to confront his son about it. Harry was doing fine. After 2 weeks back at the castle, Harry and Naruto had only been paired with Dada partners. They were paired with the other house they shared class with because they were told that this would improve their relationships with the other houses. Neville Longbottom, Harry's partner, was a shy boy who was anxious about everything. Lavender Brown, a girl, was paired with Naruto. Naruto plopped down in a chair beside Harry and whimpered, "Harry, I'm bored." With a sigh, Harry put a bookmark in the new charms book his father had given him. Harry nearly moaned as Naruto smiled and asked, "And what am I supposed to do about it?" Naruto had a tendency to want to take actions that would often land them in trouble. Harry nodded and put the book on his bedside table before saying, "Let's go exploring. We've been here for half a year and we hardly know anything about the castle." "All right. I'll agree with that logic. Where do you want to start?" After more than a week and a half of exploring the castle, the two had essentially found nothing of interest. The most that had occurred was that each of them had lost 50 points after Professor Snape chased them out of the dungeons while they were undoubtedly attempting to sneak into the Slytherin common room. Fortunately, since Snape was to blame, no one held them accountable. They were investigating the vicinity of the greenhouses today. Even though it was cold outside, it made things easier because the older people weren't staring at them strangely. They discovered that there was another person in the room as they investigated Greenhouse 1, the only one they had been permitted to enter thus far. The unidentified individual was assisting Professor Sprout with setting up for the upcoming lesson and moving pots. Harry grinned, "Hello Professor, hello Neville." Neville was one of the few Hogwarts students who didn't give a damn about Harry's sorting. He was also quite anxious and bashful. The older Griffs and Slytherins bullied each other a great deal as a result. Neville eyed Harry and Naruto, and Harry grinned. Hi? It was common knowledge that the two boys were not friendly with any of the Hogwarts students and hardly ever approached anyone. Other than the teachers, Terry Boot was the only person they were known to speak with. Even though we're partners, I don't think I've introduced myself properly. I'm Harry, Harry began. And I'm Naruto, Naruto went on. Together, they concluded, we would love to learn more about you. As though he had been watching a tennis match, Neville's head had been moving back and forth between the two, saying, that is so confusing. Harry gave an apologetic smile. Naruto smiled and nodded so forcefully that Neville thought his head would fall off when he asked, but is this serious? As it can possibly be. A broad smile spread across Neville's face. Harry grinned this time, and Naruto gave Neville a pat on the back. I would love to be friends. Welcome to the group, Neville. Monday had been that day. Even with a second person assisting them, they were still unable to find anything by Saturday. They were currently looking near Ravenclaw Tower. Naruto paused his study of the wall and turned to face Harry, asking, so what exactly are we looking for? He then turned to face Neville. Neville blinked and said, I don't actually know, just something interesting. Just something? Harry asked, turning to listen. Neville was motionless, gazing at a spot in the wall. Yeah. Anything at all. Why? Neville asked, noticing that Harry was observing him. Because I think I found something. When Neville revealed his news, Harry was already approaching him. There, Naruto still defeated him. What did you find? Neville asked, stooping to inspect the rock in the wall that was slightly higher than Harry's knees. Harry looked at the rock and its surroundings and asked, does this stone look different to you? While Harry pushed on the rock and those around it, Naruto started to bounce on the balls of his feet and said, it does, yeah. Not by much, but enough to be seen if you're looking for it. It remained stationary. He decided to try a different strategy, so he grasped the stone's edges and pulled as hard as he could. It slid smoothly this time. The brick stopped moving as soon as it was halfway out, and the wall started to move. They gaped as a whole section of the wall, roughly 5 by 6 feet, moved 3 feet backwards as Harry swiftly released the stone. The boys exclaimed, oh wow, as the hole revealed a flight of stairs leading down to the left. Harry asked, looking into the hole, want to follow? Naruto shrugged and said, it seems safe, I can't see anything though. Neville followed despite his disbelieving gaze on Naruto, saying, we won't ever know if we don't try. Naruto shrugged once more and asked, are you sure you're not a Gryffindor? They traveled in silence for a few minutes, feeling more anxious than usual due to the darkness. Hat put me in Ravenclaw. I don't see why, but yeah. Neville yelled in shock as the entrance closed a short distance down the stairs. However, as soon as the door closed completely, the torches on either side of the stair came to life, so the panic quickly subsided. Neville sighed and Naruto nodded in agreement with his brother. Well, I guess that means that there's no turning back now. Harry grinned and said, at least there's light. Before the passage changed, it seemed to go on for hours. Naruto was the first to notice the change. Harry took a closer look and asked, is it me, or does it seem like there are less stairs? Neville made a little happy noise and said, there's less stairs. Harry quickly burst his bubble. Neville and Naruto moaned together, you guys do realize that we still have to come back up these, right? Naruto then staggered. They were on level ground. A brief tunnel with a door carved into the rock was visible to the three up ahead. Neville tugged on it as they ran to it. Neville pushed on it when it refused to move. Neville explained, and Harry rushed over to him, staring at his hands. Ow, Harry said. Harry applied a little healing jutsu, and Neville grinned with no pain. The door shocked me really hard, I don't get it, Neville said. Harry nodded and turned to look at the door. Thanks, Harry. It was composed of polished, smooth rock. There were a few minor dents throughout the door, but no cracks. The handle that Neville had yanked on was also clearly visible. Naruto gasped and grabbed his pocket as Harry studied it. Harry gasped as Naruto held up a small sheet of parchment covered in kanji and several seals. Harry! Look! He exclaimed. The remnants of the markings on the door could still be seen if you looked closely. Harry began, Naruto, what is that? They had forgotten about Neville. They quickly explained the seal on the door and gave their new friend a brief demonstration of sealing. Harry nodded absently, so it's basically a rune that says that only Naruto can open the door? That was about it. Naruto smiled and placed his hands on the door handle, asking, then what are we waiting for? The door swung out and away from the group as it glowed. What it showed was breathtaking. They stood atop a square tower that was extremely tall. This floor had 3 walls filled with bookcases that reached the ceiling, and a stone bridge led out into the center of the tower. After crossing the bridge, the three discovered a platform that seemed to be hovering in midair. Neville exclaimed, "Wow!" As they entered the platform. Few magics could force an object to comply with a command from someone other than the caster. However, Naruto's desire to descend to the bottom was perfectly matched by the platform, so it obeyed. As they disembarked, the platform at the bottom sank slightly into the ground and remained there rather than hovering. All of them gazed up, staring. The tower's height had to be at least 7 stories. Harry exclaimed, "Oh wow!" But not because of the room's height. There were doors in between the portraits that hung on the walls. Harry took a very cautious approach. He was aware that the individuals in 2 of the paintings were well known to them, but he was unable to determine how. "Naru, Nev, come look," the 6 paintings said, curiously observing the 3 of them. Harry couldn't tell if the 2 people he connected with were crying out of joy or sorrow. Harry jerked back in disbelief as she said, "Come closer, Harry. I want to see if that really is you." Neville gasped, but Naruto also gazed at the image. "Harry. That's your mum." Harry looked at Neville in disbelief, saying, "What?" Neville nodded and said, "My mum." Harry gaped at his friend and said, "I've seen several pictures of her. This looks exactly like her." Naruto approached the portraits and asked, "Are you absolutely sure, Neville?" The man beside Harry's mother said, "Are you Minato's son then?" This man could only be Harry's father, Naruto thought as he stared. "How do you know my dad?" Harry and Neville had halted their conversation and moved to Naruto's side. As Harry's father explained, Naruto nodded, and then one of the other portraits coughed. "Minato was my cousin by marriage." Harry's father coughed and nervously rubbed the back of his head, saying, "Oh, Harry's mother took over and said, "Boys, these are 4 people that we need to introduce you to." What James is supposed to say is that these are the 4 founders of Hogwarts. Rowena, a dark-haired woman, emerged from the portrait at the end of the group, followed by Godric, the red-headed man in the portrait next to her, Helga, a honey-blonde with gentle features, and Salazar. Harry, Naruto, and Neville all gasped at the final individual to emerge from the shadows of his portrait. This final individual shared Harry's short, ruffled, dark hair, but he also had a savage smile. Neville stopped abruptly and looked at him. Neville stammered, "What are you staring at, you insolent child?" Naruto scowled as he stood in front of his friend. Harry nodded and turned to follow his friends, saying, "We should leave." Even though it was pleasant to see his parents, his friends wouldn't stay if they were going to be offended. "Wait." They came to a halt but did not look back. "Godric." They started to walk away after hearing an unplanned altercation break out behind them. "Damn it, Salazar. Get your head out of your ass and apologize," the group said, pausing once more as the portraits went silent. A sharp intake of breath occurred. Neville turned to face the group in the paintings and said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said such things about you, and for that, I apologize unreservedly." Neville bowed and pulled the other 2 back to stand in front of the paintings, saying, "I accept your apology in the spirit it was offered." Harry and Naruto grinned at each other. "Well, as you all seem to know already, I am Harry's dad. You may call me Dad, James, Prongs, whatever." His wife nudged him. "You may call me Lily or Mum." Harry grinned and said, "I am Harry's mother." Salazar received a reprimand for his trouble, and Helga moved forward with a hand on his shoulder. "You may call the rest of us by our given names or surnames only." Salazar gave a warning glance and fell silent. Neville stood up, saying, "Now, to finally get to why you are here." James silenced Naruto before he started, saying, "Exploring." Lily nudged her husband, and Rowena took over. "It wasn't sheer luck as to why you happened to come upon this tunnel after so long." Godric put an arm around his wife's waist and said, "In fact, it wasn't luck at all. Our magic called you here. There is actually supposed to be 4 of you, but the other is not here yet." Salazar said again, "We wanted to wait, but something came up." Harry got up and said, "There is something dangerous in the castle." Naruto was furious and asked, "The headmaster knows?" To help Naruto relax, Neville placed a hand on his shoulder. Neville snarled a little at the news, saying, "Of course he does. This is the headmaster we're talking about, Naru." Neville glared at an arbitrary spot on the wall and said, "He's putting us in danger purposefully." Lily let out a sigh. "Settle down please." Almost instantly, the commotion stopped. Harry nodded and said, "We need to plan. The how, the when, and the what." The group went through the middle door and clicked it shut behind them. "Let's go into the offices." As they ascended the stairs to Ravenclaw Tower, Harry leaned heavily against his brother and sighed with exhaustion. It had been a lot of fun meeting his parents, but descending into that tower was exhausting. All he could do was be grateful they hadn't had to climb back out. That would have been an absolute nightmare. As they ascended to their dorm, Harry nodded in agreement with Naruto's words, never again Harry, never again. Almost instantly, they both collapsed into their beds and went to sleep. The three of them began implementing their plan the following day. As the boys continued to play practical jokes on Quirrell, he became a primary target and his stutter got worse. Better yet, none of them were ever caught, and they managed to get the twins to play a practical joke on him as well. As the boys targeted the third floor, Quirrell dissolved into a trembling mess. The two ninja.in training explored the entire wing, slipping past the traps with ease. However, Neville was the one who obtained the necessary item. Naruto gazed at the blood-red stone that glinted in Neville's hand and asked, "That's it?" When they returned to the surface, their anxious friend had discovered it in his pocket. Neville gave a shrug. "Seems like it. Do we have any descriptions of the target?" Neville had noticed that Harry and Naruto occasionally used the same ninja lingo. Neville returned it to his pocket as Naruto shrugged. "We'll take it to the council later." The 6 paintings in the room were referred to as the council. With a collective nod, the group easily avoided the sleeping Cerberus and returned to the surface. The boys dispersed back in the main hall, with Neville heading to his house and the other two to their own in Ravenclaw. They were in front of the portraits in the tower once more. "So, we still have to have another member of our group before we can fully explore the library?" they asked. Neville and Harry were standing calmly, but Naruto was bouncing on the balls of his feet. James grinned as Lily nodded. "You kids catch on fast." "The answer is yes, but there is something special about this number." Harry's pupils widened. "The 4 founders." Salazar gave a nod. "There were 3 of them." "That is exactly correct. Now, guess which one you're related to." Harry was a better fit for Salazar than Rowena. Neville was a better fit for Helga than the other 3, and Naruto was a better fit for Godric. The other 2 gasped and glanced between Salazar and Harry. "I am the heir of Salazar, Neville of Helga, and Naruto of Godric." The first person to discuss the revelations was Neville. Naruto nodded in agreement, saying, "I can see it. Harry looks just like him. Same hair and everything." Salazar gave a nod. Harry nodded absently and said, "You are right, Mr. Potter. You were right on all 3 of your guesses." Naruto appeared a bit out of his element when he asked, "So that means that the last heir is the heir of Ravenclaw?" Naruto appeared to become slightly more perplexed at the nods. Ravenclaw moved forward and asked, "Then, if we are the heirs of specific houses, why didn't we go into those houses?" With Neville and Naruto nodding, Rowena went on, "Just because you are the heirs to a specific house, it doesn't mean that you will go into the house. If Harry had said that he was the heir of Ravenclaw, you would have believed him, yes? You would have believed him because of how intelligent he is and how he is a strong reader. If I were to say that all 3 of you could have gone into any house at all, would you believe me?" Naruto gave her a skewed expression. Rowena chuckled and said, "I'm still not sure I belong in Ravenclaw." Harry nodded, and Neville nodded a little. "You are doing fine, Naruto. Now, think about what I said. Is it true?" Harry said. Rowena grinned as she turned to face Harry. Harry inhaled deeply before beginning the explanation he had come up with. "Since you seem to understand what I am talking about perfectly, Harry, why don't you explain?" "Naruto, you use cunning every time you plan your pranks. You are fiercely loyal to a point and would die for any one of us. You are also extremely brave. You do charge into things without thinking a lot, but you have the intelligence to back it up. Neville, I have seen how loyal you are to your friends. You're so loyal you would rather die than see us get hurt. You are smarter than you think, especially with plants. You are also really cunning, as evidenced by that move you pulled on Salazar, and you are obviously brave. Unlike Naruto though, you think about what you are doing before you do it." Both boys blushed profusely with the praise and smiled. Harry looked at him. As soon as Harry was done, Naruto jumped in to add more. "Don't forget yourself, Harry. You, the epitome of a Ravenclaw, nose always in a book." Neville got involved. "And the way you always lead us even when you don't know what is ahead. Not to mention the number of plans you come up with on a daily basis. You are better at fitting into all the houses." As the 2 doubles conversed, confusing the paintings, Harry chuckled and said, "Then we are." When Harry looked at his watch and saw that it was 10 minutes past curfew, he gasped and said, "Thanks you guys." The 3 hurried back to the exit in their dorms, waving, "We'll see you later." They were all exhausted and went to bed right away, but fortunately none of them were apprehended. They did not sense the ward control shifting onto each of them in equal parts, nor did they sense the air around the castle changing to reflect the atmosphere of Hogwarts. No, They were all completely unaware of the changes taking place in Hogwarts that evening. They were all too preoccupied with dreamland exploration. Harry moaned as he rolled over. He didn't like how early morning had arrived. Harry. Harry scowled when his brother abruptly sat up in bed. Naruto blinked and glanced around, asking, "What, Naru? What happened?" Harry shook his head, saying, "What do you mean? Why am I sitting? Naruto must have been dreaming." Harry looked at his watch and lit up his wand, saying, "You probably had a dream." Naruto nodded and the two hurriedly and discreetly prepared for their run. "It's 5:30. Let's go for our run." Silently, they slipped out of their common room and dorm. Walking on the wall. Once they were outside in the hallway, Harry signed to Naruto. They both channeled chakra to get up and began walking up the walls to the ceiling as Naruto smiled. They continued walking in that manner until they arrived at the entryway. The two slipped outside and almost had a heart attack when a shadow emerged from the wall to join them. They hurried to the floor because they knew that falling from that high would kill them, ninja training or not. "Hey guys." Neville emerged from the darkness and was almost impaled by a number of pointed, sharp kunai. Bloody. He dodged quickly, a move that all of their friends had mastered by ambushing the two brothers. Neville smiled sheepishly and said, "Sorry Nev, you know what happens." Of course. He took a moment to glance at the bushes where he had previously been hiding. Harry heard Neville say, "We had been hiding from any patrols that come out here at night." Neville grinned and said, "We? Hermione and I, you know, we expected you to be out here half an hour ago." Harry looked up. Naruto was growing paler by the moment as his mind processed Neville's words. "Hermione? You can't mean that same girl that died on Halloween?" he asked. He had a severe fear of ghosts. Neville grinned. He was also aware of that. He gestured to Harry and said, "Of course I do. Hermione, I would like you to meet my friends, Harry and Naruto." Naruto was nearly as pale as the girl who emerged from the bush where he had been hiding. Harry bowed respectfully and then nudged his brother, saying, "It is nice to actually meet you, Miss Hermione." Naruto shook like a leaf and squeaked in fear. Hermione laughed and approached Naruto, saying, "Please ignore my brother, he is deathly afraid of ghosts. Peeves only reinforces this fear." Naruto blinked incredulously at her, rapidly recovering from his shock. "It's all right, Naruto. I didn't like ghosts either." Harry arched an eyebrow and asked, "You didn't?" Neville remained expressionless. Then he must have known already. Harry noticed that Naruto's eyes were wide. "No, I didn't really even believe they existed." Hermione sighed. "Then why did you become a ghost?" Harry scowled at his brother's impoliteness. "Naruto." He muttered to himself. Hermione appeared surprised by Naruto's apology, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry Hermione. That very rude and I sincerely apologize." Harry developed an inquisitive expression on his face as Naruto nodded and said, "It's okay Naruto. I needed to tell you anyways." Neville appeared intrigued as well. "Here's what I was told." Harry rubbed his eyes and grimaced. A headache was approaching. Neville, who was seated across the table from him and appeared worn out and even a little agitated, asked, "Find anything yet?" Less than 2 weeks had passed since they first met Hermione. The ghost, and they had yet to come across any information about Nicholas Flamel, the person she claimed they needed to locate in order to determine what Quirrell was pursuing. They weren't in the library with Naruto. During taijutsu training that morning, he had unintentionally broken a portion of the fence surrounding the pumpkin patch, earning him detention with Hagrid. Hagrid had actually kicked it and split it cleanly, as they had claimed when he had fallen on it. Naruto was down at Hagrid's, helping to paint and fix the fence. With a groan, Neville closed the book he was reading. Harry shook his head and said, "I'm not getting anywhere." He wasn't either. He checked the time once more by looking down at his watch. Neville sighed and got to his feet, saying, "Well, it's almost curfew anyway. Let's try again tomorrow, yeah?" Harry simply grinned and gave his friend a pat on the back as they left the library and made their way to their separate residence halls. "This is going to take forever, isn't it?" Harry asked. Taking his time, Harry returned to his home via the longer route. Over the past 2 weeks, a number of things had happened very quickly. Hermione's appearance, several months after her death, was the catalyst for it all. She had informed them of what was going on in the castle that they were oblivious to, including the fact that Quirrell had installed the troll there. Instead of telling them directly what he was doing, she advised them to seek out a man by the name of Nicholas Flamel. Harry's headache suddenly flared up, making him wince. He recognized Nicholas Flamel, but it was like staring into a dark pool. Though he couldn't see it, he knew something was there. Harry flinched and looked up, surprised to see that he had already arrived at the common room. "Are you going to answer the riddle or not?" he asked. Oh. He scowled as the knocker repeated itself. He wondered why this riddle was so challenging. He heard a whisper before he could respond, and everything around him went dark. As he regained consciousness, he tried to maintain his breathing level. Before letting the person who kidnapped him know that he was awake, he needed to figure out more details. It was a pointless endeavor. Harry opened his eyes and said, "Ah, the boy. Who lived. I see that you are finally awake. Since the enemy knew you were awake, it was useless to pretend." He regretted not acting more. He had never seen this room before, but he was lying in a stone room that was probably still in Hogwarts. The stone appeared to be very similar. In the first place, he was certain that he would have recalled seeing a gilded mirror similar to the one that was not 5 feet away from his lying position. In the second place, the ceiling was so high that he was unable to see it. The fact that his adversary was in front of the mirror was another. After declaring that he was awake, Quirrell seemed to have chosen to ignore him. He was examining the mirror after turning. Harry ignored his crazy muttering and concentrated on getting off the ropes. The ropes were sufficiently loose to allow him to move his hands after 5 minutes. Sadly, the time had been too long. Quirrell's frustration with the mirror's failure to provide him with what he wanted had grown rapidly. Harry froze as Quirrell's master entered the room with him. "Master, how? I do not understand why I am not getting the stone," he said. Quirrell asked, and a raspy voice said, "Use the boy." When Quirrell turned around and saw that Harry was still lying where Quirrell had left him, he was trembling. "Yes. Of course." Before Harry could react, Quirrell grabbed his jumper as the ropes came loose. Harry stood in front of the golden mirror and scowled in bewilderment. "Boy, look into the mirror and get me the stone," he exclaimed. What Quirrell was raving about was beyond his comprehension. He glanced at the mirror once more and nearly gasped when he saw that Harry had broken it rather than his reflection. "I don't want Quirrell to get the stone." Without Harry even realizing that his hand had moved, a swift hand appeared and a kunai flew from his grasp. The image in the mirror disappeared as it broke into multiple pieces. With a cry of fury, Quirrell sprang forward, grabbed Harry, and slammed him across the room. Harry drew his wand and scowled when a spell instantly drew it away from him. Harry had been called upon by Quirrell. Harry recoiled, the memories of shouting threatening to overwhelm him. "You idiot boy. Do you know what you have cost me?" he said. When Harry had screamed, Quirrell had broken his wand. Quirrell was on him once more, hands around Harry's neck, screaming in rage. Harry's hand rose again in an invisible movement, and Quirrell flew back, screaming in agony this time. A kunai sunk into his elbow. Without wasting any time, Harry raised his left hand and took a brace of shuriken from the other belt pouch. What is this mockery?" he exclaimed. Quirrell died with another shriek as they all flew true. However, Harry was unable to lower his guard because, as soon as Quirrell passed away, a black cloud emerged from his body and flew directly in Harry's direction. Minato Namikaze let out a sigh. Just a few weeks after his boys returned to Hogwarts, he had briefly returned to Konoha. He was currently working on the paperwork sorting system and assisting the elderly man with paperwork in the Hokage's office. During the first week of his return, he registered Harry and Naruto as Konoha Ninja and gave them a name under Team Arashi, the codename he was currently using. Over the course of the weeks, he had completed all the paperwork in the office, shown Sarutobi the secret for handling paperwork, blackmail material, reviewed what had been passed since Minato had died. Sarutobi was furious about the shit the civilians had pushed through, and begun to set up a more effective sorting system for missions. Little wanted to do the plethora of nonsense that needed to be done. He let out another sigh. Harry and Naruto used to write letters every week, but they hadn't written in a while, and he was beginning to worry. It was usually not the case, but he hoped they had just been late in sending the letter. Naruto had a way of getting them into more trouble than they would have otherwise, and Harry was a trouble magnet. A flashback. Minato turned to face his 2 boys who were sitting on a fallen log on the edge of their yard. "Okay boys. You have 2 hours to find me and take these bells from my side." Harry had turned 7 in July, and Naruto had just turned 7. "Hi." Shortly after they both felt at ease around him, he began teaching them Japanese. His boys disappeared as he said, "And your time starts now." Although Minato had Hiraishin seals on their pants in case they got into trouble, he was not going to actively seek them out. His sons had jumped right into ninja training, and he was extremely proud of them. Harry was an excellent strategist, but Naruto was a natural with seals. Minato exclaimed, "Ah!" and jumped into the trees. It was fear, not pain, that had caused Naruto to scream. Minato was far away from him. Minato appeared beside his son's sides and quickly completed the seals for Hiraishin. They were facing a mature bear together. Kuso. Naruto. Harry, get behind me, now, he yelled, yanking the boys behind him while attempting to repel the bear. Suddenly, he felt two tiny hands jerk something from his belt and run back toward the house. Minato hurried after the boys in an attempt to retrieve the bells and escape bear harm. Finish the flashback. He shook his head and laughed. Harry came up with the idea after Naruto happened to run into the bear. They had made the decision to enrage it and entice their father to come to their aid. Before Harry had given a detailed explanation of how he had known they wouldn't be hurt, Minato had been incensed that they had so voluntarily put themselves in danger. Untrained and wandless shielding had not been what he had anticipated. Done yet, Minato? Minato asked, raising his head. He hadn't even heard Sarutobi enter the office or the elderly man dismiss his Anbu because he was so preoccupied with his thoughts. As he worked on the array, Minato glanced down at it. It was finished. Sarutobi examined his face and said, "Yeah, old man, I finished." "What's bothering you, Min?" Minato sighed, knowing that the Hokage would see right through his pretense. "Nothing." Sarutobi frowned and arched an eyebrow. "Fine. I'm worried." The eyebrow remained raised. Sarutobi grinned and shook his head, saying, "Geez, don't you have anything else to do? You are annoying, old man. Naruto and Harry haven't written recently and I don't know why. Now will you stop pestering me?" Sarutobi sighed. "It's not like them to not write. This is rather odd, Minato. Are you going to go back and check?" Minato sighed. "I'm strongly considering it. I mean, sure, they might have forgotten, but it's not like Harry to forget these things." Minato nodded, stood, and disappeared with a loud noise that sounded almost like lightning. "Go, Minato. Nothing will burn down while you're gone. We can talk more when you return." Sarutobi stood looking out of the window beside his desk at the village, saying, "For your and the boys' sakes, I hope they are fine." A dark sensation settled in the pit of his stomach. With a loud crack, Minato emerged onto his back porch and landed heavily. International apparition was always noisy and challenging. Quickly and stealthily, he unlocked the rear door and entered his quiet home. Minato walked around the house, looking for any movement or changes. The box of mail in front of his door was the only difference he had noticed. It included every letter from the previous week. 2 letters, entirely of parchment, were at the top. His heart almost stopped when he opened the first one. On the opposite side of his eyelids, lights were on, and he was lying in what was probably a bed. The lights shone brightly. Too much light, he was not yet prepared to awaken. Naruto asked his brother, who was dozing off on the hospital wing bed, "Why isn't he waking up yet, Dad?" On the opposite side of the bed was his father. Harry was so pale he looked like a ghost. He had been discovered at the end of those traps that Dumbledore had disabled almost a week ago. 2 days had passed since Harry went missing. Then their father arrived, almost insane with anxiety. Harry had been fortunate to live. When he would awaken was still a mystery to them. Neville went straight to Harry's bed as soon as he entered the hospital wing and asked, "Is he up yet?" When Harry vanished, he had been furious with himself. The last person to see Harry had been him. Neville sat down with Flump in the chair beside Naruto and said, "No, not yet." Hermione is worried too. When they learned that Harry had vanished, they told the headmaster about Hermione, who had been the one to track him down. Given that Naruto was afraid of ghosts, Minato was very interested in their ghost friend and asked, "Tell me how you met her again." Neville sighed. He had been telling the same story over and over. Harry opened his eyes grimacing and said, "We were waiting in the bushes until Harry and Naruto came out. That's how they met." Everyone seated around him nearly toppled over when he said, "You forgot that we nearly skewered you." "Harry!" they all exclaimed, and Harry winced. His voice was very weak as he said, "That's Miname. Where's my glasses?" A pair of hands thrust them onto his face. Harry said with a feeble smile, "Hey Dad." He could see Naruto and Neville seated to his right, and his father to his left. They addressed the Sandaime Hokage as their grandfather, saying, "It's nice to see you awake, Harry. Your grandfather says hello as well." Minato grinned and said, "Tell Gigi that I said hi back." Harry was all right. Harry drank from the glass of water on his bedside table and asked, "How long have I been out?" Gifts were heaped upon it as well. At the entrance to the wing, Professor Dumbledore said, "Nearly a week, my boy." Everyone looked up. Minato shook his head and said, Longer than I thought. Only Harry would believe that a week away from home wasn't all that significant." The headmaster appeared shocked by the abrupt shift in topic, and Minato snorted, "So, did I miss the exams?" Neville tried not to laugh as Naruto shook his head in mock disappointment, saying, "Only you, Harry." By this point, Dumbledore had recovered and attempted to regain control of the conversation. What? I am a Ravenclaw after all. Yes, you missed your exams, but we can schedule a time during the summer for you to make them up. I'm sure. Minato interrupted him. Dumbledore attempted to conceal his rage at being totally diverted, saying, actually, Albus, my sons and I won't even be in the country for most of the summer. These plans have been in place for several years now. His favorite had never been Minato. Minato's eyes froze, and Naruto and Harry both shuddered. May I ask where you are going? You are, after all, taking our country's most famous person with you. I don't have to tell you anything. They're my sons. Not pawns in whatever scheme you are making. Harry will take his exams during the first week of summer break. After that, we're gone. Dumbledore was furious. Minato had halted his plans once more. Dumbledore turned and walked away after saying, all right, Harry, your tests will begin the day after Madame Pomfrey lets you go. Good luck. Disappointed, Neville asked, so, you guys won't be here all summer? He couldn't visit the country because his only friends wouldn't be there? Neville nodded sympathetically. Sorry Nev, we planned to tell you tomorrow. Dad's had us down for the Chunin exams this summer since we were 6 or 7. Minato raised his eyebrows and asked, can I come too? Harry inhaled deeply before telling his father about Neville's training and how he and Naruto had essentially become a team. Harry, care to explain? Harry asked. Neville turned pale, and Harry thought he would disappear. All right. While I can't say that I approve, I guess Neville can be your third member. If. And only if. His grandmother approves him coming. Neville. You have the week after you get home to convince your grandmother to allow you to come. Neville gave a nod. When Minato said, I won't let them down, sir, his eyebrows shot upwards once more, and a small smile appeared on his lips. He glanced at his watch, a gift from the third, and said, good, good. Minato got up and went to the doors, saying, I've got to go now, paperwork and stuff to do. See you boys tomorrow. Oh, and Harry, Minato said with a savage smile, remember that I am in charge of your training. Harry moaned and collapsed back into his pillows as Naruto smirked. Harry swiped at his brother, who danced out of his reach, saying, you know, normally it's me that gets the punishment training. Don't even start. Harry rested his head on his desk and moaned. All he needed to do was the practical after finishing his essay on charms. At last, it was his final exam day. All of them had been fairly simple, and he would have plenty of time to chat with Hermione afterward. Although she expressed some excitement when she learned about their summer plans, she was sad that they would all be away for the summer. Harry sat up as Professor Flitwick paused in front of his desk and asked, are you finished, Harry? Yes, sir. Flitwick floated to his desk and got up on a stool to get a better look at Harry. So, all I have to do is make this pineapple, he said, gesturing to the fruit at the end of his desk. Dance? Flitwick chuckled. Harry nodded, then took out his new wand. Yes, Harry. All you have to do is make it dance. Harry was taken by Minato when Quirrell snapped his other wand, and they went to get a new one. It was cherrywood, with a piece of fur from one of the giant tigers in Konoha and an ink core. It seems that the ink stabilized the fur more effectively than any other liquid. As long as it worked for him, Harry didn't really care what was in it. The pineapple grew slender arms and legs as he made the appropriate movements with his wand. Suddenly, the pineapple started performing the Macarena while music started to play. Oh, that's wonderful, Harry. Flitwick had jumped off his stool and started laughing as soon as the music began. With tears still streaming from his eyes, Flitwick stood up once more and asked, did I pass? Before Harry broke the spell, they watched as the pineapple attempted to dance off the desk and said, you definitely did. You definitely did. Harry gave a cheeky salute and walked out of the classroom, saying, thanks professor, I'll see you next year. In the tower they had discovered earlier in the year, his brother and father were waiting. Harry nearly leapt from the floating platform as it sank to the bottom, saying, hey Dad. Minato grabbed the flying child and said, hey Harry, before he could hurt himself. How do you do? Minato and Naruto had been in the tower since the end of term, but they had only created the appearance that they had left. I passed. Made it do the Macarena. Minato ruffled Harry's hair and erupted in laughter. They were startled by another outburst of laughter. Godric and James were both trying, but failing, to keep from laughing. Lily was giving James a fierce look. While Naruto grinned mournfully, Harry grinned at his mother and said, good job Harry. I'm so proud of you. As Helga spoke to them, Minato rubbed the back of his head anxiously and said, so, you're all leaving in a few days? Yes. I'm taking the boys to Konoha to take their exams. Lily sighed. Minato examined the back of his hand and asked, are you sure that they're ready? Harry and Naruto turned and looked at their father, saying, "Actually, no. The only reason I am letting them try it this time is because the exams are in Konoha. If it were anyone else, I would make them wait a few years." Godric gave a solemn nod. The two boys winced, but Salazar smiled and said, "Besides, I have a full month and several compression seals on my home that I can activate. They're going to hate me." Harry, Neville, and Naruto followed Minato through the trees to Konoha, thinking, "I can't believe you managed to convince your grand to let you come." They had to go the extra mile because none of the three were officially registered yet. Minato had only begun the paperwork. They needed to complete it themselves. As he ran ahead of his charges, Minato grinned and said, "I can't either. I honestly thought it would take a lot more work than it did." He was dressed in the standard shinobi attire he had been donning ever since he began going back to Konoha. Before Minato motioned for them to slow down, the three children continued to converse. They were getting close to Konoha's great gates. Minato stopped and said, "Hello Izumo, Katetsu," to the guards of the Perpetual Gate. As the guards observed the children standing in a formation behind him, Minato grinned and said, "Hello Arashi. Who's the kids?" He had shortened Neville's name and changed Harry's to make it easier to say in Japanese. "My Genin team. Naruto, Hari, and Nev." It was already Japanese for Naruto. Minato shook his head, signaling that they shouldn't inquire. "Naruto?" Katetsu shrugged and Izumo blinked. "Are we able to go in?" "I suppose. You are registering them as a Konoha team, right?" Minato laughed. Izumo blinked once more and said, "Of course. Is there any way I would do anything else?" As Izumo objected, Katetsu grinned and said, "Go through Arashi. Izumo's not doing his job properly." Minato led his charges through the gates and through Konoha, saying, "Come on boys." The Hokage Tower was their destination. While Neville appeared somewhat disoriented, Naruto and Harry greeted the Hokage as members of their family and said, "Hello Gigi." As Harry translated the Hokage's words, Naruto pushed Neville and said, "Hello Naruto, Harry, Minato. Who is this third young man on your team, Minato?" "Neville." Neville just used his name to introduce himself. "He doesn't speak Japanese yet, Hokage Sama." Just by changing the way he was addressed, Naruto and Harry became alert, and Neville quickly followed suit. The Hokage handed Minato a sheaf of papers that was on the left side of his desk and said, "I see." Minato grimaced a little as he closed the documents. "So, he is the third on your team. How do you plan on getting them all up to par?" he asked. The Hokage turned to face the three children in front of him and said, "Time. Compression. I've had this planned for months. The addition of Neville has only caused me to add a few more months." Neville and Harry were nearly 12, and the three of them were 11. They were unaware of the ordeal Minato would subject them to. Those poor idiots. Naruto collapsed to the ground, exhausted, saying, "Ugh." Harry lasted just 10 minutes longer than Neville, who had done the exact same thing more than an hour earlier. At last, Neville mustered the strength to raise his head and give his new sensei a fierce look. "You all did really well this time." Neville moaned, "Yes, I know that I am evil." With a sigh, Harry tried to sit up. Key word. Tried. After helping Naruto stand up, Minato turned to Neville and Harry and said, I think you overdid it, Dad." With a feeble smile, Neville accepted the glass of water Minato offered him. "Maybe just a little. But, you've got to admit that in the 3 weeks we've been in here, you've all improved greatly." Harry took a deep sip of his own water and grinned, saying, "I don't regret it though." Naruto exclaimed, "That's the spirit, Nev," while Neville gazed at him. Harry sighed and got to his feet. "How the hell do you have so much energy?" he exclaimed. Neville blinked and said, "He's always been like this, Nev. Eventually you get used to it." He sighed and got up, saying, "Round 2 I suppose?" During his training, their father had insisted that they call him sensei. "But of course, would you expect anything less from our dear sensei?" he asked. Neville and Harry sat up more quickly than anyone would have imagined and looked around the room for Minato. "Speaking of Dad, where is he?" they asked. "Lunchtime." Neville squawked in shock at Minato's sudden appearance in the middle of Harry and Naruto, who hardly batted an eye. As he took a sandwich, Harry grinned and said, "Have I told you that I hate you sometimes?" "Every day, Nev. Every day." Naruto was verifying the directions his father had given him when he asked, "So we have to make it to room 301 in the academy tomorrow by 9:30. Neville exclaimed, "Yep. That is absolutely correct." Minato merely grinned and asked, "And you're not going to show us where the academy is, are you?" In the 9 months his team had all picked up knowledge quickly. Harry sighed. This seemed too easy. At least they were getting out of today's time constraints so they could search for the academy. Neville scowled and said, "That's not even the first test either." Joy. As Harry took a seat at their kitchen table, Naruto yawned and said, "Morning guys." They were making breakfast at 8 in the morning. Harry turned to the other person seated at the table and asked, "Got everything, Nev?" Neville just gave a yawn. It was too soon. Last night, they had gone to bed much too late. It was a quiet breakfast. Minato was completely invisible to the three of them. They thought he was either waiting for them or sleeping. They weren't particularly concerned. Naruto nodded and nudged Neville, who had dozed off at the table, saying, "Time to head out." They had 45 minutes to reach the academy. Their sensei was waiting outside the room's door, saying, "Glad you all three made it." The three had walked up to the third floor of the building, taking the easy route. Neville was still half asleep when he said, "Meh." The three obeyed, saying, "Anyway, pass me your permission sheets, I'll hand them in." They all flinched, and some of the listening Jonin wondered how the mysterious Anbu had trained the kids to be so terrified. "Go inside guys. Don't forget, I love you, and, if you seriously screw up, I am also in charge of your training." Since the children were dressed in Konoha Hitai Atesh, the senseis of the Konoha teams were also curious about their origins. "Love you too, sensei." As they all walked into the classroom, Naruto and Harry gave Minato hugs. The three instantly positioned themselves defensively, and Naruto reflected, "Well, this isn't quite what I expected." Both foreign and Konoha shinobi had crowded the room. The three were simply extremely resistant to it, even though they were all aware that the majority of the shinobi there were displaying their intent to kill in an effort to frighten others. Neville held their sensei accountable. The three exclaimed, "Hey, hey," as they observed a group of Konoha shinobi shouting and waving from one side of the room. Apparently, one of the boys was attempting to attract their attention. Yes, since Naruto was the most fluent speaker of Japanese due to his upbringing, he had already been chosen to serve as their group's spokesperson. The boy who had previously yelled was quite noisy and accompanied by a dog. "Who are you? I mean, you seem to be about our age, but we've never seen you before." When Harry approached, the dog would not go near him and would instead complain. The boy paused and struck up a conversation with the dog. "What do you mean they smell dangerous? They can't be any older than us, Akamaru," the puppy cried once more. Neville raised an eyebrow and said, "I'm going to go talk to them anyways. They can't be that dangerous." Harry shrugged. It was also accurate to say, "Don't look at me. I don't care much for dogs." Even after Harry moved in with Minato, he had never been fond of dogs. "Hey, my name's Kiba. What's yours, and why do you smell funny?" A girl and another boy had approached the now named Kiba. "This is Shino," he said, gesturing to the boy who had trailed him. The bottom of his face was hidden by the long collar of his coat. He was making a low humming sound that Naruto and Harry could hear. He gestured to the girl and said, "And that's Hinata." She didn't seem to want to be there and appeared extremely anxious. Kiba held out a hand and said, "I am Naruto. This is my brother, Hari, and our teammate Nev." Naruto refused to accept it. Naruto scowled and observed what was going on behind Kiba, asking, "What's wrong?" "They're going to get in trouble." A silver-haired man from Konoha had been attacked by a group of ninja wearing musical notes on their headbands. Just a few seconds later, a huge puff of smoke materialized, as Naruto had predicted. The voice roared through the room, "Shut up." Harry winced. Everyone in the room waited impatiently to receive a number. "My name is Ibiki Morino and the first part of the Chunin exams start now. Take a number and sit in the seat directed." This statement said. Neville, Harry, and Naruto were dispersed throughout the throng. Every genin was seated in less than 10 minutes, and Harry had reunited with his friend and brother. Naruto was 3 rows up and right in front of Neville, who was 4 rows up and to the left. He was almost at the rear of the space. "Alright, like I said, I am Ibiki Morino, head of Konoha's T&I division. When I say start, you maggots are going to flip over those papers and answer those questions. Every person starts out with 10 points. Because this is a team test, your points are added together for a beginning total of 30 points. Every time you are caught cheating, you will lose 10 points. If your points run out, suck to be you when your teammates get a hold of you because you just caused your entire team to fail." He cracked a sad face. His roar made many, including Harry, cringe. "In 45 minutes, I will explain the rules for a 10th question. Begin," he commanded. Silence prevailed for 90% of the next 45 minutes. The failure of random teams by a random proctor was the only thing that broke it. Harry didn't even try to respond to the questions. He paused dramatically before saying, "Time, I will now explain the rules for the final question. As he was about to say, first rule. You can choose to not take the 10th question. In doing so, your points will be immediately removed and you and your team will fail. A genin from another village got up to stop him. Well, then why wouldn't we take it? Ibiki gave her a fierce look. She cowered and sat down, saying, sit down and shut up. Maybe if you wouldn't interrupt me, I would get to it. Good. Now, as I was saying. The second rule is thus. If you choose to take the 10th question and you fail it, you will never be allowed to take the Chunin exams again. Further screams erupted throughout the room. Harry winced and swiftly covered his ears as he watched Neville and Naruto follow suit. Additionally, it was advantageous because Ibiki lost his temper easily. Silence, he bellowed. Harry flinched. Once more. It was still very loud, even with his ears covered. The room was filled with a wave of extremely volatile murderous intent. Any who wish to not take the 10th question needs to raise their hands. A proctor will call your number and you will leave with your team. As the minutes went by, the desire to kill continued to grow. The numbers in the room decreased, team by team. Both the teams that had initially surrounded them and the girl from the Konoha team that they had seen were still there. Ibiki sighed when no more teams appeared to depart after some time. Good. All of you who are left, pass. People started yelling, and the noise level suddenly increased. Silence. You, in the back with the extremely messy hair and green eyes. Tell me what the true meaning of the test was. Harry exhaled. Naturally, the proctor would be aware that he had solved the problem. Truthfully, Harry had figured it out in the first 5 minutes. You were testing our information gathering skills and our ability to take the unknown, Ibiki grinned. He took off his bandana, causing several of the genin to gasp. You are absolutely correct. I was testing your spying skills with the first 9 questions. Any who cannot gain information accurately can pay a high price. There were visible signs of torture on his head, including ridges and bumps. He put his bandana back over his head and said, you are also correct in that I was testing your nerves with the final question. Harry ignored part of his lecture and concentrated on the noise he was hearing. Anyone who cannot accept mission information based on slightly incorrect or missing information will not make it in the higher ranks. The higher you go, the more obscure your missions will become. You must be prepared to accept the reality of becoming a higher-ranked shinobi. It was drawing near rapidly. Neville and Naruto both turned to face the window. It was rapidly approaching whatever or whoever was to blame. Ibiki was sufficiently distracted by their movements to glance out the window as well, but he quickly leapt back to avoid whatever was coming through it in a glass spray. It was a person, wrapped in a banner that was now pinned up behind her, and someone said, "All right kiddies," as it came through the window. From the other side of the room, Harry heard Naruto murmur, "Anko Midarashi, the incredibly sexy kunoichi. What the hell?" and smiled. It was impossible that the kunoichi had not heard. She did, however, appear to be quite preoccupied. There were 54 of the genin left, including his team. I can work with this. Can't believe more of them didn't quit. I'll cut this number in half by the time we're done today. All right kiddos, to the forest of death, she said, leaving before most people could catch up. Harry let out a sigh as the remaining genin got to their feet and started trailing several Konoha shinobi to their destination. His group was among the last to exit the room, but they didn't do it the conventional way. Rather, the trio disappeared into 3 distinct bursts of illumination. Naruto, who had inherited his father's wind-based chakra, grimaced as he emerged from his own yellow flash of light. Neville and Harry possessed distinct chakra types. Harry was water-based, and Neville was earth-based. As a result, their flashes turned blue and green, respectively. Holy crap! They instantly ducked under flying projectiles, alert for the proctor who had just hurled them. How? The proctor, who was directly in front of them, seemed to be on the verge of panic. How do you know the fourth's jutsu? She asked, pressing a kunai against Naruto's neck. In a flash, Harry was beside Naruto, knocking the kunai away. Harry drew his brother away and turned to face Naruto, only to have to avoid a kunai that was approaching from behind. Trade secret? Asked the Hokage. Harry turned and gave the insane woman the cold look his father had taught them, saying, "You have great reflexes, kid." He didn't respond either. Several of the faster teams had arrived by now and were eagerly observing the byplay. Harry abruptly stopped entertaining them, which disappointed them. Right. Everybody appears to be here. Gather round kiddies. Can you all hear me? Too bad, a few people gasped. We are standing in front of Konoha's most dangerous forest, aka, the Forest of Death. To you folk however, this place is to be known as the second stage of the Chunin exams. As he heard the other Junin sensei discussing the tests, Minato grinned behind his mask and asked, So, the Forest of Death? Teams from every sensei present were in the second stage. A sensei from Kumo asked, "What's the Forest of Death?" Minato choked back a chuckle. Surprisingly, Kakashi responded, "It's a horrible forest filled with things that most jonin would be having trouble handling, let alone genin." Minato examined his former pupil. "You're making me feel so old, Kakashi." Minato scowled a little. Minato abruptly initiated, "What do you think, Arashi?" He hadn't been paying attention. What do I think about what?" Fortunately for him, he had covered his voice with seals on his mask. "The forest? What do you think about your genin? Think they'll handle it?" Minato was coughing. "Of course they will." His laughter was evident to everyone in his vicinity. "My genin are strong enough to handle most anything. Anything up to S rank, that is. They could battle him for at least 5 minutes at a time because he had trained them well. For fresh genin, this was a very remarkable accomplishment." One of the Suna senseis gave him a questioning look. "Arashi?" The majority of the Konoha senseis exchanged anxious glances. "I didn't know one of your former Anbu had taken a genin team." Minato cut them off, saying, "Well, there's a good reason for that, you know." Many of the Konoha shinobi appeared shocked when he said, "Aside from the fact that I'm not actually a retired Anbu, I haven't been in Konoha for the last 6 years." Seeing the looks he was receiving, he added, "I keep in touch with the Hokage, of course." The Iwa shinobi was now the one asking, "Why 6 years?" He saw Kakashi's eye narrow and said, "Because my sons were 5 years old. Both of them." Hopefully this would somewhat throw them off track. He would definitely catch that. Minato nodded and said, "Oh, so your sons are on your team?" The majority of the shinobi appeared to be satisfied by this, as many of them turned their heads away. One of Minato's unique kunai flared with intense heat, causing him to visibly wince. Sadly, his boys had to fend for themselves. The purple-haired Kunoichi scowled at Harry for having the audacity to inquire, "So we have to fill out these forms and turn them in to get a scroll? What's to stop the other teams from ambushing us the moment we have our scroll?" Harry simply responded with a blink. "Fine, brat. The rules are that there is to be no fighting until after you are in the forest. The booth where you get the scroll is covered specifically so that you don't see what other teams are getting. Each team will receive either a heaven or an earth scroll. You have to have both to enter the tower, and you also have to have all of your team members." Harry smiled. This appeared to be fairly simple. One kunai pressed against his throat as he leaned sideways to avoid it. Harry scowled and used 2 fingers to send a spike of chakra through the cold metal, causing the insane woman to hiss and drop the kunai. "You have spunk, brat." He moved to put himself between her and his teammates, saying, "You are insane." To prove his point, she cackled. "Good." She then began distributing the papers after removing a stack from somewhere. Harry didn't try to consider it because she seemed to be wearing nothing but a trench coat. They were given to his team last. They received a heaven scroll in exchange for completing the paperwork. Paperwork demons, and turning it in promptly. Okay. Last few rules. You have 5 days to get to the tower in the center of the forest. You cannot leave the forest until the 5 days are up. And you cannot open the scrolls. Everyone got that? She responded immediately. "Good. Now, go to the gate that is marked on your scroll. You will not enter until I say so." The training ground appeared to have 44 gates distributed fairly evenly. Gate 3 was where they were expected to go. They found the correct route and arrived in just 3 minutes. After just a few minutes, her voice could be heard over a speaker that was concealed on the fence. When the gate opened, the 3 of them moved quickly. "Okay, kids. You have 5 seconds to get in there, starting from the moment I started speaking. Go," they said. The 3 came to a halt beneath a huge tree with enormous, branching roots. "Okay, plan of action," they said. Neville assumed a meditative stance and started to sense for any approaching enemies as Harry took out a piece of paper and started drawing on it. Right? They had found that Neville was a natural sensor and Harry was a natural strategist. Naruto was already known for being an expert sealer. Since Naruto was the best at both Henge and the Shadow Clone Jutsu, he was the only one who could move to a kunai just moments after it was dropped. "We need to get a Hiraishin seal on the outside of the tower. I suggest we henge one of Naruto's clones into a bug and have it go to the tower and drop a kunai there for Naruto to pinpoint to." Since Naruto was the only one of them who was completely related to Minato, the majority of them surmised that this was the reason. As a result, he had to set up special seals for Harry and Neville to visit. Okay. Naruto created a clone, which turned into a moth. It was specifically instructed to drop a kunai as soon as it reached the tower. The others took a seat and waited. Neville kept an eye out for any enemies, Naruto started making the seals he would need to get the other two to his position, and Harry started formulating a plan to deal with getting a scroll. The month took an unexpectedly long time to reach the tower. Harry's plan required several dozen of the exploding seals, and Naruto had enough time to make the Hiraishin seals. Long before the exams began, Neville had plenty of time to seal more of his chakra into the seal tags that each of them had been filling out for a few dozen weeks. Though his plans were rather complicated, Harry had actually had time to complete them. Naruto exclaimed, "Finally," and raised his chakra. A few moments later, he vanished in a flash of yellow light. Neville and Harry were also gone in a matter of seconds. As Minato told them about his children, the senseis were shocked and asked, "So you've been training one of them for only a month?" More people looked at me when I said, "Yes, but I've been training the other two for several years." Minato sighed, and the two just accepted this kid? He was not believed by any of the senseis. Actually, it was me that had to accept him. The other two met him at this school I had put them in so that they would interact more with kids their own age. The senseis were all looking perplexed. One of the Kumo senseis asked the Konoha shinobi, perplexed, "Why are you asking about them so much anyways?" The shinobi from Konoha exchanged glances and asked, "Isn't he from your village?" Well. Minato interrupted. "None of them have ever actually met the kids. They were not students from the academy. Like I said, the last time I was in the village with them was when they were 5. This was becoming tiresome. He had been asked the same questions over and over, given his answers, and then asked again within 10 minutes. His frustration was rapidly mounting. "Will you just stop asking me these questions?" he asked. Some of the Jonin simply grinned shamelessly, saying, "I don't ask you all these questions about your genin. Quit asking about mine." Kakashi sat down next to him and arched an eyebrow, saying, "Your buttons are too easy to push, Arashi." Arashi took a small piece of paper from a pouch on his belt and placed it on the wall between them, saying, "Give me a moment." After trying to postpone this conversation until later, Minato scowled and said, "There. You can talk freely now, Kakashi." "What makes you think I have something to say, Arashi?" Minato asked, turning to face the man with gray hair who was standing beside him. "I'm not a fool, Kakashi. You wouldn't have come over here if you didn't have something to say." Kakashi sighed. Minato smiled and asked, "Fine. How sure are you that the barrier is soundproof?" "I tested it on my boys when they were playing and I needed to do work. Not a peep." Kakashi grinned. Minato arched an eyebrow and said, "Okay then. I know who you really are, Arashi." "Oh, do you really?" he asked, almost grinning. This was a lot of fun. While teaching his students, he had not had much opportunity to agitate them. That had not happened because of the war at the time. "Yes. It's been a long time, sensei." Harry asked into the piece of seal paper he was holding on the tip of his finger. "Do you have the barrier set up?" He could practically hear Naruto giving a nod. Neville's end of the line snickered and said, "Naruto, I can't see you." "Oops. Sorry, Harry, I keep forgetting that you aren't here." Harry exhaled. Naturally, Naruto would. He was referring to Naruto. Harry grinned and said, "Yes, the barrier is set up." Neville sighed and asked, "How's your end going, Nev?" He was responsible for preparing the genjutsu so that a team would fall into their trap. Naruto was responsible for sending up the barriers as soon as a team was assembled, while Harry was in charge of actually attacking. It was simple, semi-efficient, and, above all, reusable. It would be available for them to use as often as necessary. "Incoming." Neville's voice was audible through the seal. Harry positioned himself in time to witness Neville passing through ahead of the team as they entered the trap. Naruto sent the barrier up as soon as Neville was free. Water style. Whirling tides. The Kumo ninja group in the center of the trap was stunned by a burst of water. Neville materialized beside Harry and unleashed his own jutsu. Earth style. Swamp of the underworld. Suddenly, the team was knee-deep in mud. The water that had previously soaked them had made the jutsu more effective. Water style. Suction. Suddenly, all of the water surrounding the swamp was drawn up into the air, drying out the ground and trapping them before it all abruptly returned to earth and pushed them farther down. Subsequently, Naruto advanced and rendered all of the captured genin unconscious. He yelled, "Yes," and gave his teammates a thumbs up. This group had the necessary scroll. The three initiated their jutsus and disappeared in separate swirls of light after molding their chakra in a matter of seconds. Just outside the tower, they reappeared. As Neville grabbed the back of Naruto's jacket, Harry shook his head at his brother's antics and said, "Cool, we're done." Naruto instantly calmed down and they began to make their way around the tower in search of a door. "Not yet, geez." We still have to go inside. Neville, who was a little ahead of the other two, had reached a door and said, "Here's one." They were easy to see even though they weren't particularly noticeable. Nice. Harry merely walked a little faster, but Naruto ran to Neville. In a flash, they were inside the tower. Naruto read the message and scowled in perplexity. What? Neville scowled as well, saying, "This makes no sense." Puzzles had never been his forte. Harry looked closely at the board and said, Indeed, he was a Ravenclaw. Neville blinked in perplexity but gestured for Naruto to pull out his scroll as well. "I figured it out. We need to open the scrolls." Harry possessed neither. Bloody. Almost as soon as the scrolls were opened, they began to smoke. "Throw them." The three of them positioned themselves defensively as the two threw their scrolls. Minato scowled and turned off his seal, saying, Kakashi gave him a worried look and asked, "What is it, Arashi?" Minato beckoned him away. My team reached the tower. Later, he wrote as he followed the summons, vanishing in a cloud of smoke. Holy crap! A few of the other Junin exclaimed in surprise. It hasn't even been a day. Kakashi sighed, as the room descended into anarchy. In 3 hours, Minato's team arrived at the tower. They arrived as the second team. Harry collapsed back onto the bed with a moan. 3 days had passed since they arrived at the tower. One of the Suna teams was the only other team they had seen. There were 2 boys and a girl on this team, and one of the boys appeared to be roughly their age. He appeared to have had little sleep as well. Never. Neville laughed and Harry grimaced. "So, anything happened while you were out?" "That red-haired boy from Suna tried to kill me." Dad interrupted him. "Also, 2 more teams have shown up. One of the Konoha teams, the one that had that Hyuga boy and the kid with the green spandex, as well as the Auto team." This got Naruto and Neville to stand up. Now that he was awake, Neville asked, "So there is only a few more teams out there that have a chance of passing?" "I suppose so. Maybe less if some of the scrolls have been destroyed." Naruto gave a nod. Harry grimaced and said, "There was only a chance for 9 teams passing anyways." He did say, "I wonder which of the Konoha teams will pass." He had no knowledge of the Konoha-based teams. Neville gave them a startled look and said, "So do I mean, we've never met them, but I can't help but feel as though we should feel a connection to them. I mean, technically, we're enemies." Harry nodded. Neville had a point. "Why would you?" "I dunno. I mean, I don't remember any of them, but I did grow up here. I just can't help it." Harry nodded. However, their father entered the room before he could say anything more. The boys exchanged bewildered glances as the speaker said, "Hello, boys. Thought I might let you know what else has been happening." It had been less than an hour since Harry had spoken to him. Harry met Naruto's gaze and shrugged, saying, "I know that Harry has probably told you exactly what has been happening, but I feel as though I need to add to it. More has happened since Harry last saw me." He didn't understand their father's point of view. Neville blinked in surprise as he said, 3 more teams have arrived. All 3 are the rookies from Konoha. Seems like they worked together. It was uncommon to have a group that was more than a short-term alliance. Particularly since these teams had shared a common upbringing. In fact, that would increase their volatility. Minato nodded in agreement with Harry's assessment. So they all arrived together. That means they are capable of at least thinking out decent strategies. Harry looked at his brother and friend bewildered and said, "Yes, however, for us, this is good. Most of them arrived with no injuries, the worst being one Sasuke Uchiha. They're senseis and I agreed that you all would spar for a little while tomorrow and later today. Why would they want to demonstrate their abilities to strangers?" Minato grinned and lifted his mask, revealing his blonde spikes and bright blue eyes for the first time in weeks. Harry gave his father a questioning look and said, "I'm glad you were concerned about your own abilities. However, we will be going through with this." Every action he took was justified. Harry turned to face his brother and asked, "But, then why? Why are you having us do this?" Naruto's hands were clenched into fists as he gazed down at his feet. Harry turned his head away from this and met Neville's gaze. They nodded and stepped aside, allowing Minato to pass through. Even though Naruto was trembling like a leaf, he was holding him tightly and saying, "Shh, it's okay Naruto. It's okay. You don't have to if you really don't want to. I just wanted you guys to interact with the teams your own age." A knock on the door caused them all to wince. Arashi-san. Harry turned to face his father, who was putting on his mask once more in a hurry. Minato gave Harry a nod. Arashi-sa. The moment Harry opened the door, the Anbu at the door ceased talking. "Hello Anbu-san." The Anbu took a small step back and reached into his pocket with one hand. "Hari, who's at the door?" Harry asked, moving aside to make room for his father. Minato waved for Harry to leave after the Anbu said, Arashi-san. After all, Harry wouldn't want to hear what an Anbu was sent to deliver. Harry grinned as he turned back to face the others. He would be telling them later, unless it was extremely confidential, based on his dad's reaction. Who was it, Harry? Neville's intense curiosity was something that many people were unaware of. Neville nodded and said, it was an Anbu. He wanted to speak to Dad. Harry also nodded, saying, doesn't sound like speaking was on the agenda. The discussion had swiftly turned into a dispute. Although they could hear Minato's voice, they were unable to decipher what she was saying. This indicated that a seal was in place. Harry shrugged and said, so, training with the other teams? He didn't care all that much. They both turned to face Naruto, who had remained silent since Harry had gone to answer the door. Harry prodded Naruto, saying, Naru. Neville shrugged and then smiled slyly, saying, come on, talk dude. Harry yelled and ran away, saying, Naruto, Harry stole all your ramen and says that you will never, ever get it back. He didn't have to. Neville's statement was met with no response from Naruto. Both of them scowled. Their brother was not like this at all. Fortunately, Minato entered shortly after, seemingly concluding his argument. Minato scowled and cast a worried glance at his youngest child, saying, Dad, something's wrong with Naruto. Naruto refused to give him or the other two a glance. Minato picked up the unconscious Naruto and encircled him in an embrace. Fortunately, he was still manageable. Neville and Harry both nodded and watched Naruto anxiously. I'll deal with this, you to go do whatever you want. I expect you back here by 9 though so that I can tell you the plan for tomorrow. Minato nodded and ruffled Harry's hair, asking, will he be alright, Dad? Harry grimaced and followed Neville out the door, saying, he should be just fine. Now, go explore. I know you truly wish to know about this tower. With a sigh, Minato carried his youngest back to the bedroom as the door closed. As he placed Naruto on the bed, Minato ran a hand through his hair and said, oh, Naruto. What am I going to do with you? Then he took a seat in the lone chair near the bed. Oh, Naruto. As they walked, Harry continued to glance suspiciously over his shoulder and ask, are you sure he's going to be fine, Nev? He's going to be fine, Harry. Neville moaned to his closest friend, frustrated. Harry was still worrying 10 minutes after they had left their rooms. Neville was concerned, of course, but he was confident that their father could look after Naruto. Neville turned and took hold of Harry's shoulders, saying, look, Harry, I know you're worried, but there is nothing we can do about it. Harry gave a blank nod when he said, you need to calm down and trust your dad. Neville had never behaved in such a manner. Neville let him go and went into the cafeteria, which was less than 2 feet from them, saying, let's go eat. After standing motionless for a moment, Harry followed him.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.